Chapter 534. On the square, the morale of the Dalajan and Gilnea's soldiers was low. The sound of their metal leg guards retreating was piercing to the ears. At close range, the kings who were suffering from the dragon's wrath did not fare as well. Each of them made a fool of themselves, but Tyrrhena's was undoubtedly the worst. Tyrrhena's, who only had a combat level of 5, was frightened by the dragon's wrath. He took 3 steps back and collapsed on his throne. Of course, the other kings either took half a step back or knelt on one knee. Even Lang sighed and took a step back. He did not look at Tyrannistas in the eye. Only Dalen Proudmoore held onto his scimitar and gritted his teeth. Even though his legs were shaking, even though the veins on his neck were bulging, even though the veins on the back of his hands were bulging like a dragon's beard, he persevered and faced the terrifying golden pupils of the ancient red dragon without fear. Dalen suddenly took a step forward and raised his scimitar at the dragon. "It's me, Dalen Proudmoore of the Kingdom of Kultiras. This has nothing to do with the alliance, and it has nothing to do with my kingdom. As a father, I seek justice for my son Drake Proudmoore, who died under your flames." Dalen was going all out. He was going all out. Of course, he hated the culprit's tribe. However, he was also unable to accept the fact that the murderer, who had just killed his son yesterday, was now standing beside him as an ally of the Red Dragon Alliance. Then, he would have to suck up to these powerful allies and pretend that nothing had happened to fight alongside the Red Dragon. Of course, he could not forgive himself for causing the entire kingdom of Kultiras to be engulfed by the dragon's flames because of a personal grudge. So, as a father who had lost his son, he challenged Tyrannistas. What kind of justice do you want?" The dragon's tone was full of disdain. "A duel." Dalen's voice was powerful. He raised his scimitar and took another step forward. His bloodshot eyes stared at the dragon. Ha 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 ha. The giant dragon's laughter shocked everyone in the square. "You!" Everyone felt as if a boulder was pressing down on their chests under the terrifying dragon's might, making it hard for them to breathe. Dai Lin, who had endured the greatest pressure, was bleeding from the corner of his mouth. No one knew whether it was because of the shock or because he had bitten his lips. "Yes, just me, a tiny human in the eyes of a giant dragon. I know I can't beat you, but I demand a duel at least. This is my last honor as a father." Almost as soon as Dai Lin finished speaking, an anxious voice came from outside. "No, father, don't do anything stupid." Dalen's expression changed. He knew who the voice belonged to: Thanreed Proudmoore, Dalen's second son, the de facto crown prince of Kultira's kingdom. At that moment, Dalen saw a streak of gold in his peripheral vision. It was his lover, Gina Goldsword. Dalen knew that she had broken the taboo and used the teleportation gate to summon Thanreed to stop him from doing anything stupid. If Thanreed was affected by the dragon's anger, there would be no male heir in Kultira's kingdom. Gina Goldsword's actions hit Dalen's weak spot. Dalen's facial muscles were twitching. Various thoughts were fighting in his mind. The humanoid dragon sneered. "That's right. You have no chance of winning a duel with a giant dragon. Go back and look after your children. I can't guarantee that your family won't be affected during the duel. You know that it's hard to control dragon breath once it's released." At that moment, Dalen's expression turned cold. He suddenly shouted, "Someone stop Thanreed. I, Dalen Proudmoore, will be eternally grateful to him." The gratitude of someone who was about to die. At the same time, his descendants would hate him for eternity? Was there really someone willing to do such a stupid deal? Don't be surprised. Someone really did. Whoosh! A strong gust of wind blew. A huge ice wall that was 3 meters tall, 20 meters wide, and half a meter thick appeared in front of Thanreed and Gina. The one who made the move was actually Dooku. Dalen wasn't the only one who was shocked. All the other kings were shocked. Dooku used his other hand to stop Sasha, who seemed to want to do something. He looked at Dalen calmly. "You wanted me to help you get an explanation from the Red Dragon Army, and I did. You wanted me to stop the next king of Kultiras, and I did. You owe me 2 favors. 2 favors? Do dead people need to repay favors?" Dalen suddenly smiled. There were tears in his smile, and there was also a hint of desolation. "From today onwards, Dooku, you are my brother." Without saying anything else, Dalen ignored his son and lover's pleas. He walked forward and threw away his scabbard and armor. This heroic man who had traversed the seas for 20 years, just like that, bare-chested, proudly walked towards the opponent he would normally never be able to defeat. Ha ha ha. My chest is here. Do you dare stab me here? Talonistas laughed haughtily, slapping his broad, muscular chest. There was no sound. Dalen used his scimitar to give his answer as a father. He suddenly lunged forward, lowered his wrist and stabbed forward. The scimitar was best at slashing, but that didn't mean that the sharp tip was just for show. Dalen's thrust was the limit of a human warrior. He turned into a stream of light, and he and the scimitar became one as he stabbed toward Tyrannes. This was the most perfect stab Dalen had made since he entered the realm of heroes. Perhaps to the dragon's horrifying dynamic vision, this stab was like slow motion, not worth mentioning. Perhaps after this stab, he would be tortured to death by the human-shaped dragon in any way. However, he didn't care. He got rid of all distracting thoughts. He only wanted justice for that stab. The millions of people present couldn't bear to watch anymore. A few kings secretly closed their eyes. Only Duca calmly watched all of this with a slightly sorrowful expression. Time seemed to freeze. There was no lightning-fast counterattack. There was no bloody and cruel killing. When he clearly felt the scimitar stabbing into flesh, Dalen was stunned. The audience was so shocked that they couldn't speak. This was because Dalen's epic scimitar, which was far from being able to slay a dragon, had slashed horizontally, and the sharp tip of the scimitar pierced through the gap between two ribs on the human-shaped Tyrannes' left chest. The scimitar pierced the human-shaped dragon's heart in half. How is this possible? Chapter 535. Everyone's faces were filled with shock and confusion. Tyrannes extremely weak, but clear voice could be heard. Don't be shocked. In some ways, I feel the same way as you. For my beloved queen, I'm willing to give up everything. For her to suffer less, I'm willing to blind my own conscience and sully my own soul. I'm willing to kill humans for the filthy orcs. So, this is my atonement. You. Dalen's hand went limp without him realizing it. He held the humanoid red dragon that was about to fall, feeling a little lost. Yes, this is the red dragon race's answer to you, to humans, and to the entire alliance. I wonder, are you satisfied now? He wanted to say yes, but when the words came to his mouth, Dalen's mouth was filled with bitterness. He could not say it no matter what. Don't be shocked. You earned this yourself. If you're just a coward, I'll tear you apart in one bite. I, Tyrannes, have ruled this world for 10,000 years. I will not die in the hands of a piece of trash. Even though Dalen could clearly feel the dragon's life slipping away, the dragon's voice was still very clear. Hiss! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. The red dragon's arrogance was ingrained in their bones. Ordinary people, no matter how high their status was, or how good their reasons were, had no right to demand justice from the red dragon army. As expected, only heroes had the right to be acknowledged by the dragons. Thinking of this, everyone could not help but respect Dalen. Tyrannes was still speaking. I know that I've sinned greatly. So, after I die, you can do whatever you want with my body as compensation to you and the entire alliance. However, this is all the compensation from the Red Dragon army. Suddenly, the humanoid Tyrannistas pushed Dalen away. Then, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, his body began to grow rapidly. In less than 3 seconds, he turned back into the dragon that was dozens of meters long. However, unlike the mighty and domineering aura from before, this time, this giant dragon finally began to walk towards the end of its life. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. When the huge body of the dragon was no longer moving, everyone could confirm that the terrible dragon, that had been wreaking havoc in the earthy highlands and the Hillsbrad area for months, and even destroyed the entire king's city of Riptide Castle, had finally made up for the sins it had committed. Suddenly someone started applauding. It was Duque. He applauded his brave father, who knew that he was no match for the dragon, but still dared to challenge it alone. Clap clap. The clear and unique applause attracted everyone's attention. Clap clap clap. More people started clapping. Pa 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 pa. They were the elite soldiers of the various countries who were still in the plaza. They were slapping their swords against their shields. They were saluting Dai Lin in a warrior's way. However, the winner of this slightly special dragon-slaying battle was sitting paralyzed on the ground, unable to get up. Everyone could see the cold sweat glistening on his back. Gina and Tanrid hurried over to help Dalen up. King Dalen didn't go back to rest. Instead, he insisted on coming to Duque. "Thank you, Brother Duque." The hero of the Seven Seas smiled sincerely. "Even after this battle is over, you must come to Kultiras more often." Of course. Duque smiled. Dalen glanced at Lang, who was beside Duque, and whispered to Lang, "If Lang or William don't treat you well, you can come to Kultiras. You can choose between a prince or a duke." Hey. Lang pretended to be angry. On the other side, a triumphant ceremony that had been specially prepared for Duque had been disrupted by Dalen. In less than 10 minutes, the ceremony was dismissed hastily. Of course, some people were unhappy about this incident. Some politicians even secretly cursed Dalen, saying that Dalen had wiped out the cooperation between the Crimson Dragon Army and the Alliance. Or more accurately, the Crimson Dragon Army and the humans. Afterwards, in the state guest house, Lang also asked Duque about the Crimson Dragon Army. Duque pondered for a while, and decided to reveal the truth to Lang and Andoin. "I didn't expect Tyrannis to do that. That's an ancient Crimson Dragon. Will the Crimson Dragon Army really not mind a powerhouse second only to the Queen? It's alright, because Tyrannis was about to die anyway." Lang and Andoin were shocked at the same time. "Isn't the life of a dragon unlimited?" Andoin asked in bewilderment. "Yes. However, even the life-giver can't deal with the torture of the disease. Tyrannis has been suffering from the disease for many years. This is no secret among the dragons. His vitality has been weakening, and he has only lived for so long because of Alexstrasza's support." Duque sighed. Lang asked, "Then did he do so much for the Queen purely to repay her kindness? And in order to heal the enmity between the Crimson Dragon Army and the Alliance, he deliberately sacrificed himself?" Duque smiled bitterly. "I can't answer that question, but I think the window of cooperation with the Crimson Dragon Army is not completely closed." Andoin immediately perked up. "You're saying that the Alliance can form a legion of Dragon Knights?" The Orcs' Dragon Knights really made the Alliance suffer. Even with the support of the Wildhammer dwarves from the Eagle Nest Mountain, the Alliance actually lost more than they won. After all, the limit of the Griffin's talent was there. Compared to the WRMS, they were far inferior. Duque smiled slyly. "It's Stormwind that has the opportunity to form a legion of Dragon Knights." This sentence really made Lang and Andoin laugh uncontrollably. "Okay, the last question. Duque, how do you solve the problem? That's my personal secret." Duque smiled mysteriously. After sending off the 2 leaders of Stormwind, Duque suddenly found a red-haired beauty, holding a large bottle of wine on his windowsill while taking a shower. The iconic fiery red bikini armor with gold-rimmed edges, and the tall dragon horns on her head all spoke of the owner's identity, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. Gazing at the bright moon, the queen murmured softly, "I realized that human wine can sometimes be a good thing. At least it can numb my nerves when I don't want to think about things." Duque smiled faintly. "Don't joke around. This bit of wine can't numb your nerves. If I force my vitality down to 1/10,000th, then it'll be fine." The queen looked back with a sad expression. She seemed to want to cry but couldn't. Chapter 536. Duque would never have thought that the all-powerful dragon queen throughout Azeroth's history would have such an emotional side. "Tyrannis is very important to you, right?" Her slender fingers stroked the mouth of the bottle. The queen seemed to be lost in her memories. "I don't know. That guy chased me for more than 10,000 years, but I never accepted him." Duque realized that there was a very important difference in history here. In the original history, Tyrannis was the queen's oldest partner. But in this life, why did he chase the queen for 10,000 years without success? "He's too weak." The queen showed a helpless expression. "I was born the largest dragon in the entire race. Once he tried to pounce on me half-heartedly, but I smacked him with my wings and broke 7 of his ribs." Duque was speechless. Once, I deliberately held back and let him come closer. In the end I was careless and he broke another leg. Duque thought to himself, I understand why tyrannies lived a short life now. At this point, the queen took another big gulp of wine. But things like feelings don't only occur between males and females. It's like how humans keep pets. After a long time, there will always be a sense of kinship, no matter what, right? Yes. Duque didn't say anything. He knew that what Alexstrasza needed the most right now was a listener, not someone to give her advice. 10,000 years. When I woke up from my sleep, the first thing I saw was his ugly face. The first thing I saw before I fell asleep was his face. He was weak, but he treated me so well that I have nothing to say. The queen took another sip of wine. But I enjoyed the praise of mortals, and was called the giver of eternal life. But I couldn't cure his disease. No matter how much life force I inject into his body every morning, it will be completely devoured by the evil disease in his body the next day. Duque was silent. Why did it sound like cancer cells on Earth? When he realized that I couldn't take the torture anymore, and was about to lose the protection of the dragon egg, he took the initiative to ask the beastmen to fight. I know that he wanted to end his own life. He wanted to die gloriously on the battlefield. This was his dream for the past 10,000 years. Now that he has chosen to die to atone for his sins, it can be considered a worthy death. Sigh. Duque sighed softly. At that moment, the queen seemed to be a little drunk. She reached for the dimensional bag on her waist, and took out the wrong thing several times. In the end, she took out a platinum disc that was only 1/5 of its original size, and threw it to Duque. This is the talisman you wanted. I convinced the three of them to modify it according to your request. When Duque saw this, his whole body shivered. Oh my God. They're really willing to cook for me. It's really worth it for me to sell my body and become an old man. I've been living in the wilderness, enduring the cold and wind. I've been hunted by giant dragons in the sky, and I've been hiding from orcs on the ground. I've even had to play a mental game with Nesario. It's all worth it. Demon's soul. No, according to the system's prompt, this should be called Wrath of the Dragon. As Duque expected, the 4 dragon aspects failed to kill Nesario. The cunning Deathwing did not forget his instincts as an earth dragon. Under the joint pursuit of the 4 great dragons, he actually plunged headfirst into a huge volcano crater, desperately drilling into the high-temperature lava underground. Among the 4 dragons, Alexstrasza and Nozdormu could barely catch up. However, Isra and Malygos could not. 2 against 1, and fighting in the earth and lava that Nesario was familiar with, the 2 of them had no chance of winning, so they could only give up. In return for Duque's efforts in facilitating this incident, the 4 dragon aspects agreed to purify and transform the remaining demon soul into an amulet specifically for the black dragon race. The system prompt was as follows: Demi-artifact, Wrath of the Dragon. This is a targeted demi-artifact modified by the 4 dragon aspects, excluding the earth dragon Nesario. The original prototype of this demi-artifact was the Soul of the Dragon, that once shocked the universe and destroyed the entire Burning Legion fleet in one blow. After several modifications, with most of its functions lost, it was transformed into a special demi-artifact for Duke Marcus. Wrath of the Dragon Special Effect 1. Crisis Perception. Since there are 2 Black Dragon King scales in the Demigod artifact that contain 12% of the Deathwing, Nesario's soul, when Nesario appears within 5,000 meters of the host will automatically sense the distance, direction, and form of Nesario. Wrath of the Dragon Special Effect 2. Soul Punishment. Activating the divine power infused by the 4 dragon aspects can launch a mental attack that directly targets Nesario's soul. The attack time is up to 5 minutes, and during the special effect period, Nesario's combat power will drop by about 30%. Wrath of the Dragon Special Effect 3. Black Dragon Torment. As Nesario is the king of the black dragons, he is the ancestor of all black dragons. Activating this special effect can directly torture the soul of any black dragon descendant. The closer the distance, the purer the bloodline, and the greater the power. After reading these instructions, Duque was so elated that he wanted to hold Alexstrasza's face and kiss her a few times. He did not expect that she would come to him before he could even kiss her. Hey, it's time to replenish the life force that you've lost. I can't stand the sight of an old man like you. Let's talk about it. Why do you have to take off my shirt? Duque was shocked. However, he could not resist. She even wanted to drink the dragon's power potion to make herself extremely strong. This fellow did not need to drink any potions at all, because the fellow in front of him, who looked like a red-haired beauty, was actually a red dragon. To his dismay, Duque found himself stretched out on the bed. Then, the queen merely leaned over his chest and licked him a few times, and he actually returned to his 17-year-old appearance, a handsome young man with short black hair. At this moment, the atmosphere suddenly became a little strange. This was because the queen's hands were like iron pincers that gripped Duque's wrists. Well, in terms of strength, Duque was completely outclassed. The queen hiccuped. Now it seems that you're quite handsome too. Not knowing what the queen was up to, Duque feigned civility. Yes, although my classmates don't admit it, my mother always says that I'm handsome. I'm sleepy. The queen yawned. For some reason, this action of hers was very feminine. Well, there's a strange feeling. Chapter 537. Duque's head was full of question marks. Was this the rhythm of welfare? He felt that something was wrong. The queen's voice became extremely soft, almost moaning. I feel like my body is floating. There seems to be something pushing against my throat. Could it be that because I just lost an admirer, there's an empty space in my heart? Am I like the bad women in human novels, who fall in love with someone else immediately after the death of their lover? Hey, what kind of nonsense novels are you reading? Even in danger, Duque could not help but complain about this kind of trashy female novel that misled people. No, misled someone who might be the most terrifying existence in the world. Alexstrasza raised her head. Her golden eyes were filled with a haze of confusion. The queen seemed to be a little confused. Revelation of the holy light. Duque cursed. Bullsh *T. How could revelation of the holy light have such a vulgar story? Do you believe that I will fight the Archbishop of the Holy Light to the death? Alright, I was just saying. Alonso's couldn't beat you even if he gathered the entire church. Ugh. The queen burped again. She tried hard to remember. Well, I remember there was another cover under that one. I think it was The Unspeakable Story of the Duchess and the Coachman. F***CK. So it's changing the cover. Countless seniors played with it when I was in university. They bought an English-Chinese dictionary or something for the phone. At this moment, Duque wanted to strangle all the female authors in the world of Azeroth. But it was obvious that the queen was delirious and was running on the road of no return. No, I can't take it anymore. The queen's face was flushed. There's a warm current in my body. There was another moan, and Duque's hair stood on end. Wait, don't tell me that's. Duke's face turned pale as he thought of something terrible. Normally, no man could resist such a situation. But the queen was still saying, could it be that my qualities as a female are awakening? However, Duque was not an ordinary man. He had the intelligence of an ordinary man. At this moment, Duque was sweating profusely. He had already figured out what the queen's so-called heat flow was. He struggled with all his might, but a few seconds later, he was horrified to find that he was like a frog nailed to the operating table waiting to be dissected. Under the queen's tremendous strength, he really couldn't move. No, please, wake up. Alexstrasza. No, Your Majesty the Queen. Only that was out of the question. Don't. Duque's tears flowed out. Could this be my love? Could this be the affection in my heart that is even more passionate than the dragon's breath? Can I tell you how much I love you? The queen's speech was incoherent. Just by looking at her delicate and alluring face, it was absolutely mesmerizing. However, Duke knew what was going to happen next. No, Yamit. Let go of me. Duque lost his composure and screamed. No, it's too late. I'm coming out. Duque, stop struggling. Accept my. Ugh. At this moment, Duque thought of the collapse of the mountains and rivers. At this moment, Duque thought of a broken dam. At this moment, Duque struggled to use magic to resist the queen's vomit caused by too much alcohol. However, Duque failed. Low-density elements would definitely be repelled and dispersed by high-density elements. In front of the Red Dragon Queen, Duque's pitiful frost elements were completely repelled. As a result, a large pile of sour and smelly vomit was poured onto Duque's chest. Then, the queen who had done such a shocking and insane evil thing actually fell asleep. He fell asleep. Asleep! Help! It's fine if you're asleep, but don't sleep there. And don't use dragon breath. Outside the door, the responsible Gavinrad seemed to have heard Duque's panic-filled pleas for help again, and finally couldn't help but rush in. In the next second, this unreliable paladin was dumbfounded. What did he see? From his angle, the beautiful Red Dragon Queen's head was resting on Duque's thigh, as if she was doing something shameful. The problem was that the queen's butt was still stuck up high. Even though she still had her pants down, it was an eyesore. Sorry to disturb you. Gavinrad immediately pulled his head back, wondering if he would be silenced or something. No, it's not what you think. Help me. Before Duque could finish, he saw the door close in despair. Me. F***ck. Looking at the fire element that seemed to have a mind of its own, following the breath of the sleeping queen, and hovering less than 2 centimeters above his dick, the horror on Duque's face froze. Help, someone save me. There's really nothing going on between me and Alexstrasza. The priest of Azeroth had a skill called Prayer of Despair. Duque didn't believe in the holy light, but it seemed that his bad luck was finally over. A familiar silver-haired figure suddenly appeared on the windowsill. For a moment, the beautiful female figure seemed to scold him in disdain. She wanted to turn around and leave, but the sour smell in the wind attracted her attention. Duque? Sasha asked tentatively. Help me. Duque seemed to have found a life-saving straw. He really wanted to cry. Looking at Duque's face, which was uglier than if he had been tortured, but had regained its youthfulness, Sasha couldn't help but burst into laughter. After the initial shock, she finally understood the situation. She put her hands on her hips, not sure if she was angry or amused. It looked like a passionate affair, but it was actually Duque being tortured by the most powerful female dragon in the world in a drunken rage. It was a pitiful and helpless matter. Alright, I got it. Sasha really didn't have any good ideas to deal with a dragon. She tried to see if she could loosen Alexstrasza's claws, but she realized that even in human form, the strength of a dragon was not just for show. Sasha was also surprised that the queen didn't crush Duque's arms and legs like twigs. Ugh, if you can't loosen her, at least help me wipe that thing off my chest. It stinks. Duque said bitterly. Wait, I have another idea. If she really lowers her spirit and vitality, we can try. What Sasha wanted to do was the druid's pacify. Most of the skills of a ranger lean towards hunters, but as the king of the forest, the nature-loving ranger also had many druid skills. Pacify made animals less angry and dispelled the enraged effect. Miraculously, the queen actually loosened her tight grip, and Duque was able to break free. Chapter 538. Cough cough. I'm saved. Duque struggled to crawl out. Then he saw Sasha, who was trying to pretend that she didn't mind, but she was pinching her nose and looking at him, as if he were a dirty thing. As for the culprit, the Red Dragon Queen, she curled up into a ball like a cat, and fell into a deep sleep. F***ck. He couldn't hit her, and there was no point in cursing her. With Sasha watching from the side, Duque could only blame his bad luck. Ugh. Alright, I'll go take a shower now, alright? At this moment Duque, who felt that his life had turned gloomy, rolled to the bathroom in resignation. There was no running water in this world. It was good enough to have 2 tubs of clean water in the bathroom. Fortunately, it was still hot. If it were winter, a bucket of ice water would be poured over his head. Just thinking about it would make him want to die. Not having a shower head wasn't a problem for Duque. Duque was quite good at controlling the water element. Now that he was far away from the drunkard who was covered in flames, the operation of the magic circuit became normal. Sitting in the bathtub, Duque agilely manipulated a column of water to rise from the bucket and poured it evenly on his body. On the other side, Sasha looked at Alexstrasza, who was sleeping soundly on Duque's bed. She didn't like it at all. She couldn't care less. She opened Duke's door and saw Gavin Rad and Vanessa staring at her with their mouths wide open. Gavin Rad's mouth was wide open. This isn't right. Wasn't Boss fighting with the Red Dragon Queen just now? Why is it Aurelia's sister now? A boss is so mighty. Oomph. Sasha snorted coldly, scaring Gavin Rad, who was obviously thinking the wrong thing. Her Majesty Alexstrasza is drunk inside and has fallen asleep. Please help carry Her Majesty to the guest room. The two guys outside had the word embarrassed written all over their faces. But who asked one of them to be a bodyguard and the other a maid? After a while, the queen was carried away, and the bed was changed into clean sheets. When Sasha returned to Duque's room, she was surprised to find that the room still had a rancid smell. After using the power of the wind to disperse it, there was still a little smell. Sasha realized that the smell came from the bathroom. Duque was still washing. There was no shampoo or soap in the world of Azeroth. There was only the simplest form of washing. But that smell. Recalling Sasha's pretentious but disgusted expression, Duque just wanted to scream for help. Suddenly Duque, whose back was facing the bathroom door, heard the sound of the door opening. The next second, a few soft fingers gently wiped the back of Duque's ears. There's still something dirty here. The one who spoke was naturally Sasha. Duque couldn't stay calm anymore. Although Duque knew that Sasha was a wife-like character in history, he had never thought that Sasha would actually come to help him bathe. Duque's body immediately stiffened. He could only let Sasha do whatever she wanted. Don't think that I want to help you bathe. You're a big shot now. I don't want to walk out and see the great hero of the Alliance being despised by others because of the rancid smell on him. That was a reason too. Alright, when a girl didn't want to do things for a guy, perhaps she could find 10,000 reasons. Of course, when she wanted to do it, she only needed one reason: she was willing. Duque felt as if he had been hit by Nozdorma's time magic. His thoughts became sluggish. Sasha didn't say much. She just squatted outside the bathtub and carefully wiped Duque's upper and back half of his body that had the rancid smell. This scene wasn't erotic at all. Instead, there was a hint of ambiguity. Something felt wrong. Isn't this what lovers do when they're already at home? Duque's brain felt like it was filled with paste. Here, turn around. Duque turned around in a daze. Sasha's face was red. She was so embarrassed that she couldn't hold it in anymore. But she focused all her attention elsewhere. Actually, we still have to thank Her Majesty. She was actually able to help you recover from such a serious life-draining curse. Look at your arm. It was all dried skin before. After Duque was cursed, Sasha counted and examined all the changes in his body, as if she was counting her family's treasures. There were many places that even Duque didn't notice, but Sasha did. If Illyria was the epitome of a heroine, Sasha, who was equally famous, was more like a gentle wife. It was already very fortunate to have such a famous heroine. Who would have thought that he'd even offend Sasha? Just then, Sasha revealed a very satisfied smile. Alright, the examination is complete. All the filth is gone. Your body has also recovered perfectly. There was a saying that went, a glance back and a smile can charm 100 people. This time, Sasha gave Duque a pure and beautiful smile. It was like an electric shock that struck the softest part of Duque's heart. The most beautiful thing about a smile wasn't its appearance, but the beauty that came from the heart. Even an idiot could feel that Sasha was worried for his body, and was glad that his body had recovered. This kind of prayer that came from the purest of emotions immediately broke through the last barrier in Duque's heart. Sasha. At first, Sasha thought that she would get a thank you from him. Unexpectedly, Duque caressed her face gently, and then leaned his upper body forward to bring his face closer. Sasha's body trembled, and then she slowly closed her eyes, waiting for the kiss with the most blissful expression. That's right. This wasn't the first time they kissed. But thinking back, she had always been forceful. Duque didn't reject her. Or perhaps he didn't have the time to reject her. This was the first time Duque took the initiative to kiss her. The meaning behind this was a huge leap in their relationship in various senses. Duque's lips were a little clumsy, but Sasha didn't dislike this feeling. From a light touch to a passionate response and entanglement. The temperature in the bathroom seemed to be rising. After a long time, the two separated. They were both panting heavily. Some things seemed to be just a step away. Water droplets slid down Sasha's exquisite collarbone. This scene looked so sexy. Clearly, Sasha was also mentally prepared. Duque was clearly looking at his sister. But the Windrunner sisters' beautiful faces reminded Duque of Aurelia. Sorry, let's stop here for today. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. At the very least, I hope to communicate with Aurelia first. At this moment, a familiar voice suddenly came from outside the window. At least you have some humanity, Duque. Otherwise, I won't save you if my sister next to me gets mad. This was Savannah's voice. Chapter 539. Duque and Sasha's neck stiffened. In the next moment, their reactions were very different. Duque was at a loss. Before he had transmigrated, he had been an engineering university student. In that place where Saos competed with Diao-chan, and there was no other place for men to release their male hormones, unless they were engaged in homosexual activities. Having a female friend was enough to be envied and hated by those roommates who joined the couple's dying group. The only thing that was lacking was to set them on fire. Perhaps Duque had great wisdom, or perhaps Duque was already a hero of the alliance. However, these things were useless to Duque, because he saw Aurelia's appearance. She was covered in dust, and there were abrasions on her neck, shoulders, ribs, and waist. Some were still bandaged, while others had clearly healed recently. From those shocking wounds, one could imagine how terrifying the battle between Aurelia and Savannah's against Grom Hellscream must have been. Those wounds were all near her vitals. Just how many times had she brushed shoulders with death? Just how many times had she barely escaped death, only to fall into despair again? Seeing Aurelia's heavy breathing, and seeing some of the bandaged wounds on her body start to bleed again due to her intense movements, Duque immediately thought about how Aurelia had received news that he was in danger after losing contact for many days. Then she had madly rushed back day and night. Just what kind of love was that? At this moment, Duque's mind was blank. Aurelia looked at Duque deep in conflict. Duque's guess was right. She had endured her injuries and rushed back with all her might. Each piece of information regarding Duque made her feel more despair than the last. Duque had been ambushed by the number 1 Beastman warlock, Gul'dan, and the curse of death had reactivated on him. He was getting weaker by the day, and his life force was rapidly depleting. In order to save the alliance from an absolute disadvantage, and also to redeem herself, Duque brought her third sister, Sasha, and a few others to form an assault team and infiltrate deep into the enemy's rear. There were countless flying dragons patrolling the skies, and nearly 200,000 orcs on the ground. Under such circumstances, they were ready to break into the Horde's heavily guarded grim battle fortress. How dangerous was that? What despair! Aurelia blamed herself. Why did he refuse to bring a mage with him for the sake of convenience? Why was it that when Duque needed her the most, she was wasting so much time on an unimportant tribal chief? If Duque died this time, Aurelia would never forgive herself. However, on the way, he received a piece of news. Duque was safe. Not only was he safe, but he had also become the Alliance's hero. He had actually led a team of 3 to successfully save the Red Dragon Queen. Things should have calmed down, but when she saw Duque's white hair, his aged face, and wrinkled arms in the magic mirror, Aurelia's heart broke again. She sobbed and rushed 100 kilometers through the night to Lordaeron City, then used the portal to rush over. And the result? What she saw was the scene of a youthful Duque kissing his most beloved sister. If it was another woman, the emotions that she had been suppressing for a long time might turn into a towering rage. She might even lose her composure and go on a crazy rampage. But this was her sister, Sasha. Was she happy? Disappointed? Angry? Regretful? Was it self-pity? Or should she give them her blessings? There were too many thoughts in Aurelia's mind. She could not describe the taste in her mouth, as if all the seasonings had been poured in. For a moment Aurelia had the urge to leave, but when she saw her sister's face that was extremely similar to hers, She felt as if she was the one playing with Duque in the bathroom. The contradictory feeling made her stand on the tree trunk at the same height as the bathroom. She was nailed there unmoving. Sasha had already thought of a line, which was, "Even if it's my eldest sister, I won't back down." But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she could not say them when she saw her eldest sister. A gust of cold wind blew, and she suddenly felt very, very cold. Servanas, who was stuck in the middle of this melodramatic love triangle, was also having a headache. On one side was her most respected eldest sister, and on the other was her most beloved third sister. Stuck in the middle, she would die no matter which side she helped. Queen Sylvanas, who had always been wise and decisive in history, had a splitting headache. Suddenly, as if she had lost control of her emotions, the branch under Aurelia's feet broke. After a crack, Aurelia's body fell. Without any hesitation, Aurelia turned around and wanted to leave at high speed. At this moment, Servanas's eyes were finally filled with murderous intent. Her eyes clearly told Duque, "No matter which one of us is sad, I'm going to kill you." Duque shuddered. Finally a man. Don't go. Otherwise, some of us will regret it for the rest of our lives. A thunderous roar spread throughout the entire state guest house. Be it Sasha, Aurelia, or even the onlookers in the state guest house, everyone trembled and froze on the spot. Duke suddenly stood up and activated the Phoenix Flame magic circuit in his body at the same time. The high temperature instantly evaporated the water on his body, but his perfect control did not let any of the steam affect Sasha next to him. He raised his hand, and 10 hands of magic appeared. In less than a second, he dressed himself neatly. In the next second, he grabbed Sasha's waist and opened the window in the bathroom that was more than 2 meters tall. He crawled out and floated to Aurelia with slow fall. Duque let go of Sasha, who was still a little confused, and said to Aurelia, "Let's go for a walk." It wasn't a request or a plea. The firmness in his words made Aurelia feel that what Duque was about to say was the truth. Before Aurelia, who was already unsettled and about to have a breakdown, realized what was going on, Duque grabbed her hand and pulled her away like a puppet. The Dalajan State Guest House was very large. Although mages didn't care about aesthetics, the State Guest House was used to entertain national guests. Naturally, it couldn't be too shabby. In a quiet corner, Duque sat on a stone bench with a back. Then, Sasha sat down on Duque's left side obediently, and Aurelia sat on Duque's right side after half a second of hesitation. Duque took a deep breath and stroked Aurelia's golden hair. "Aurelia, you've worked hard recently. Can you tell me what you've been through recently?" Chapter 540. In that instant, the emotional defense that Aurelia had built up with so much difficulty collapsed. That dignified and elegant female ranger general, who was the epitome of elves at almost all times, suddenly cried like a child. "Boo-hoo!" Aurelia threw herself onto Duque's shoulder and grabbed onto Duque's shirt tightly. Her tears flowed down like a river, quickly dyeing Duque's blue mage robe from light blue to dark blue. In the end, it turned into Duque patting Aurelia's back lightly, and then Sasha pressing her hands on the back of her sister's hands. It was a very strange scene. The older Aurelia seemed more fragile, and the younger Sasha became the one who comforted her. After crying for a while, the crying and tears finally stopped. Aurelia used her lark-like voice to talk about what had happened in the past few days. Then, Sasha told her sister about the dangers of diving into the wetlands. It was very interesting. Both sisters had the same reaction. When Aurelia talked about how her neck was almost split in half by Grom's blood howl, Sasha's hands trembled. On the other hand, when Sasha said that she was about to die under the young dragon's breath, but was saved by Duque's ice barrier, Aurelia also shuddered. After the two sisters finished talking about their experiences, the air suddenly fell into a dead silence. At this moment, Duque actually wanted to say something, but realized that he didn't know what to say. But at this moment, the temperature of the air that had already begun to cool suddenly plummeted. Wait, shouldn't the two sisters be reconciling? What's wrong now? Duque was shocked to discover that an unknown battle aura that didn't belong to science or magic was compressing the air. The two sisters stood on the left and right, and Duque, who was sandwiched in the middle, felt that his body was suffocating from the mysterious power surging out of the two sisters. Duque cursed inwardly. Weren't the two sisters supposed to calm down and talk nicely? What was this terrifying feeling of stagnation? Aurelia elegantly took out a small handkerchief and wiped away the tears on her face. Since she didn't put on any makeup, she didn't have to worry about ruining her makeup like an internet celebrity on Earth. She smiled and regained her valiant and heroic posture. Aurelia gently flipped the blonde hair hanging down from her temples and proudly raised her extremely lethal hydral peaks. "All right, sister. I acknowledge that you have the qualifications to snatch my man. However, I will use my strength to make you give up. The relationship I've had with Duque for many years isn't something you can surpass just by spending 2 weeks with him." Duque almost bit off his tongue and swallowed it back into his stomach. "Damn it. After saying so much, you just think that my sister is qualified to fight with you? However, was it a good idea to use such a big move? This was a time kill." On the other side, Sasha didn't back down. She lightly flipped her silver hair and stretched her perfect long legs. "I won't give up. Sometimes, even an instant is enough to surpass tens of thousands of years of mediocrity, let alone 2 weeks. I believe in my choice, and I also believe in my own charm." All right, resplendent instant is greater than eternity is out. Before Duque finished complaining in his heart, the two sisters saw that the other party wasn't moved and suddenly changed their target at the same time. "Duque." The two sisters looked at Duque and said in unison, "Duque, who do you choose?" Choose who? This situation had already surpassed jealousy and the fight between sisters. This was more like a kind of recognition of their confidence and beauty. But what kind of joke was this? Both of them were famous heroines in the future. Both of them were such amazing beauties. God actually made me have to choose one of them, and there was no way to avoid it. I had to make a choice now, immediately. What kind of harem is this? This was clearly the most tragic charaba between sisters. No retreat. No compromise. I have to choose. A terrifying feeling of being roasted by two great demons, one big and one small, arose spontaneously. What should I do? What should I do? What to do? The cry in his heart was destined to not receive a response. As the focus of the two sisters' gazes, Duque only felt that every second was like a year. That's right, every second was the torture of reincarnation level by level in the 18 levels of hell. But in the next second, Duque felt a wave of grievance. As a pure man, why do I have to choose between other people's choices? Nonsense. When did I become the kind of man who was led around by a woman? Suddenly, Duque stood up, his right hand seemingly waving casually in his mage robe. He looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle, and then turned his head, revealing an expression that was clearly smiling but actually crying. His eyes quickly condensed with moisture, and 2 seconds later, a turbid tear slid down his cheek. Under the moonlight, the tear could clearly be seen that the entire face was divided into 2 halves. Duque's voice was full of solemnity. "I am an only child. I have no brothers or sisters. But I believe that it must be a very beautiful thing to have a sister who has accompanied me for 1,000 years. To make such a close pair of sisters have to decide the winner and the loser for a man, such a cruel thing. I can't do it." "Duque?" Aurelia was a little panicked. "Wait." Sasha panicked even more. "Instead of forcing the two of you to decide the winner and the loser, I will make the decision. The 3 of us will all be the losers." After saying these words in the deepest voice, Duque raised his feet and was about to leave. In the blink of an eye, a sharp sword suddenly cut through the night sky and was nailed less than 5 millimeters in front of the tip of Duque's foot. The powerful force attached to the sword was still trembling after it shot through the garden tiles. Cervantes' angry voice suddenly came. "I said if you hurt any of them I will kill you." A cold smile appeared on Duque's face. "If you kill me, that's fine. The Alliance has won anyway, and I have nothing to worry about." Then, under the shocked gazes of the 3 Windrunner sisters, Duque continued to stride forward. "Stop." Another arrow was shot at Duque's foot. This time, Queen Sylvanas' voice was fierce. "This is the last warning." But Duque still didn't stop. He sighed softly. If my death can solve the problem, then let me die. No, wait, Sina. Aurelia was also anxious. She hurriedly stood up. Second sister, no. Aurelia even pounced on her. At this moment, Servanas shot out her strongest arrow. The arrow contained the power of thunder. Almost as soon as it was shot, it exploded in the garden. The sharp sword shot at Duque with the anger and determination of Queen Sylvanas. Chapter 541. The three sisters did not expect that Duke would not dodge or use magic. He would actually use his own flesh and blood to meet the arrow head-on. A look of relief appeared on his face, which wasn't particularly handsome, but could be considered delicate. That's right. Relief. To the two sisters, the 17-year-old Duque shouldn't have such an expression. His homeland was destroyed by the orcs, but he didn't give up. His capital was occupied by the orcs, but he didn't give up. The alliance was at its worst. More than 3 kingdoms' capitals were destroyed. Even Rotterdam, the leader of the alliance, was almost destroyed, but he didn't give up. He didn't give up even when he was faced with the extraordinary Red Dragon army, or when he was cursed with the cruelest life-draining curse. But at this moment, Duque chose to give up for the first time in his life, due to the difficulties of his feelings. And what he gave up was his life. Duque's choice shocked them. It was a shock that reached the depths of their souls. Idiot. Flash. Queen Sylvia's angry face finally showed a look of surprise. Duque, don't be silly, Aurelia exclaimed. She thought of Duque's magical mirror image spell. No. As she screamed, Sasha thought of the magical scene of Duque activating Ice Barrier at the last moment. So both Aurelia and Sasha hesitated for a moment. But under the sisters' exaggerated dynamic vision, Servanas' arrow pierced Duque's chest without any resistance. The piercing sound of the arrow tearing through the mage's robe was unbearable to the sisters' sharp elven ears. In the next moment, blood splattered everywhere. The blood splattered at the speed of the arrow, stimulating the sisters' visual nerves to the maximum. Fake. No. This was real. There were no magical waves at all. Duque was really going to die for love. Just because they were forced by the sisters. The greatest hero in the history of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, did not die at the hands of the millions of orcs, did not die under the dragon breath of the controlled Red Dragon Legion, did not die under the pursuit of Deathwing. But because of a relationship? No, absolutely not. Whether it was out of love or reason, the two sisters had never thought of forcing Duque to this extent. They had never thought that Duque would be in so much pain because of their coercion. In the end, the two sisters attacked at the same time. Boom! A bolt of lightning flashed. Time seemed to freeze. In the garden, the 4 of them froze as if they had been hit by a spell that stopped time. On a tree 10 meters away, Servanas maintained his stiff shooting posture. On the ground, Sasha's right hand grabbed the tail of her second sister's arrow. Most of the lightning on it went to her seemingly weak arm, and her fingers were pitch black. In the middle, Aurelia's left hand grabbed the middle of the arrow shaft. The high-speed friction almost scraped off the skin of the Windrunner's fingers, leaving a ghastly trail of blood on the shaft. At the back, Duque puffed out his chest. The sharp arrowhead had already pierced through Duque's chest and ribs. If it had been half an inch more, it would have pierced through his heart and killed Duque. But it was just a little bit more. Duque survived after all. Are you crazy? The two sisters turned and cursed at the same time. Crazy? Maybe. But it's better than having you two fight it out. I'm sorry. I really can't make a choice. It was his left eye just now, and it was his right eye this time. A second tear rolled down from Duque's face. Seeing her eldest sister and third sister's expressions, Servanas finally realized that she had been the bad guy for nothing this time. This queen, whose name was feared by countless people in the future, could only clench her teeth, stomp her feet and leave. What was left was only an angry curse. You got off easy, you little brat. The commotion in the garden of the state guest house couldn't be hidden from anyone. Luckily, Gavin Rad was still responsible. He asked Vanessa to chase away the onlookers, and forced himself to be a third wheel to treat Duque and the other two's wounds. Actually, Servanas had held back. If she had used her full strength, the two sisters wouldn't have been able to heal him so quickly. The state guest house finally quieted down after midnight. On the balcony, Duque and the two sisters kissed goodbye. Aurelia took the lead, and Sasha could only watch her eldest sister angrily. Then she used the same amount of time without backing down. Not a minute more, not half a second less. It felt like the two sisters had made some sort of agreement that Duque didn't know about. Rest early. You have an alliance meeting tomorrow morning, right? Aurelia said with concern. Yes. You have to miss me. Sasha was even simpler. Yes. After finally chasing away the Windrunner sisters, Duque could finally sleep peacefully. Sleeping on the soft bed, Duque let out a long sigh and thought to himself, luckily, I'm quick-witted, risking my life and losing my moral integrity to revive. I don't even want to lose one. That's right, it was all a ploy. Who asked Duque to revive? Anyway, he would find a chance to get his moral integrity back in the future. If he really hurt anyone's heart, and caused them to walk down the path of sorrow, Duque would never be able to forgive himself. Duque quickly fell asleep. In less than 5 minutes. In a daze, Duque was ambushed. Duque opened his eyes, and his vision was filled with that head of shiny golden hair that seemed to glow even in the middle of the night. Aurelia? Damn it! She actually dared to sneak away at this time? Didn't the two sisters make some sort of agreement not to sneak away or something? Duque had just pretended to be benevolent and said that he couldn't choose between the two. And now he was with Aurelia. Wasn't that just slapping his own mouth? Duque wanted to reject immediately, but who knew that Aurelia would seal Duque's lips with a tender finger? Perhaps Duque could find 10,000 reasons to refuse, but who knew that one sentence from Aurelia would settle Duque? What she said was, I miss you, and I love you were both extremely simple words. Any writer could create countless attributives and adjectives for this sentence, but in the end, none of them could be as straightforward and powerful as this simple sentence. This sentence easily triggered the heavenly thunder and earthly fire. The feelings that Duque had also suppressed for a long time poured out in an instant. System notification. You have used lacerating strike on Aurelia's armor. You have used suppression. You have used Duque's godly sword 999 combo. Boss Aurelia has been defeated and has entered paralyzed state. Finally, he won. At this time, a pair of arms suddenly wrapped around Duque's neck from behind, and in the corner of Duque's eyes, he saw a similar shining silver light. Chapter 542. There were no other high elves who could bring out the beauty of silver hair to such an extreme. The only one who could appear here without anyone noticing was Sasha. Aurelia, who had been so passionate that she showed off all her beauty in front of Duque, was suddenly as shy as an ostrich. She actually covered her face tightly. Duque was dumbfounded. What the hell was this? Although I've eavesdropped, I still can't imagine that my elegant, beautiful, and wise big sister is like this after seeing it with my own eyes. Sasha's calm and slightly teasing tone made Aurelia feel as if her entire body was on fire. In the next moment, Sasha hugged Duque from behind. The rich and bouncy feeling made Duque shudder. Duque couldn't help but wave his sword that was still in its sheath. Aurelia almost died from Duque's trap. She let out a coquettish grumble that even she herself couldn't believe. Through the gaps between her fingers, Aurelia, who still covered most of her face, glared at Duque, and Sasha, who was behind him. Calamancida. In the High Elves' language, it probably meant, wretched girl. Are you trying to show off? Sasha chuckled. No, I'm just like you, big sister. I'm infatuated with a little boy named Duque. Then, like a slippery loach, she crawled over from behind Duque and lay down next to Aurelia. She then said something in the High Elves' language to Duque shyly. It was a prayer that combined poetry and music. Paired with Sasha's clear voice, it was rather moving and pleasant to the ear. Of course, after removing the meaningless syllables that were purely for the sake of the tone and tune, it was simplified like a cow chewing on a peony. The most appropriate translation was, I'm not talented. Please take care of me in the future. Yep, standard newlywed wife dialogue. Aurelia patted Duque, and Duque immediately understood. Duque immediately unsheathed his godly sword. And so Duque and Sasha began their sword dance. Following the ever-changing rhythm, Sasha continued to shake her fair and flat abdomen. Her 5 fair and jade-like fingers gently spread out. Her pinky and ring fingers curled into her palm and gently pressed against Duque's chest, as though she was resisting Duque's attack. It was the first time they danced together, and Sasha was obviously a little nervous. She tightened her arms with all her might and coordinated with the attacks of the godly sword. Her long, snow-white legs swayed continuously in complicated and sexy steps. Just like the European fox trot before Duque's transmigration, the intersecting and swaying movements were sometimes elegant, sometimes sensual and charming, and sometimes cool and mysterious. Her mermaid lines, which had been trained for a long time, displayed an enchanting quality that was similar to a belly dance. Duque couldn't take it all in. She had clearly been defeated by Duque's godly sword. But Sasha's expression was still so confident, so proud, so ambiguous, and so seductive. It was as though she was currently the goddess of beauty, Venus. Everything about her was filled with beauty. In his days, Duque felt as though the high elf in front of him had completely overlapped with a certain national vixen from before his transmigration. As long as there was life, the sword dance would not stop. Then the atmosphere of the two sisters' intense battle disappeared after Duque almost died to prove his resolve. When the storm-like sword dance ended, there was instead a sense of tranquility. Damn it, Duque. My third sister and I have really been bewitched by you. Aurelia bit down on Duque's shoulder. Duque bared his teeth. Hee, a good man or a good woman will always have suitors, right? Doesn't this prove how outstanding Duque is? Compared to Aurelia's wild and untamed nature, Sasha was as gentle as water. Duque spouted nonsense with a straight face. Yes, I've already used godly hypnotism on you. You won't be able to leave me for the rest of your lives. TSK. Aurelia was disdainful. Sob. What about me? Begged Duque to take pity on me? Sasha wiped her tears. Yes, the tears at the corner of her eyes were real, but they didn't flow out now. Third sister, don't ruin the show. Aurelia was annoyed. Just as they were fooling around, a white light appeared on the horizon. The sun was about to rise. The next day, Duque was woken up by Vanessa's knocking on the door. Hey, beastly Duke, the sun is up. You have a very important Alliance throne meeting in the morning. Vanessa's rude voice penetrated into the room. Duque was confused. He suddenly felt that something was wrong. Wait. Vanessa, what did you call me just now? Duke Marcus. Outside the door, Vanessa's voice was extremely calm. Of course, Gavin Rad couldn't help but snicker, which betrayed the little maid's temper. Duque quickly glanced at the records in the system. He immediately felt like killing the little maid to silence her. Stupid girl. Don't think I didn't hear you change the way you called me. Duque shouted angrily. No, you must be sleepy and heard wrong, Your Grace. The little maid insisted. I'm in a good mood. I won't argue with you. At this moment, Duque turned his head and suddenly realized that there was no one behind him. The Windrunner sisters, who were still there a few seconds ago, had dressed themselves at lightning speed and disappeared. This was way too awesome. When Duque came out, Gavin Rad and Vanessa saluted Duque. Vanessa added, Lady Alexstrasza from next door seems to have disappeared before dawn. She left a note behind. Duque picked it up and opened it. It was full of crooked words in the human common language. The first line was, I can't believe it. You actually didn't touch me last night? What the hell is this? The wail of a 10,000-year-old virgin? Alright, congratulations. You've managed to keep your life. Hey, is this a murder trap? Actually, my sleeping posture is very bad. No matter what form I take, once I fall asleep, I will easily flip out. Last time, an ancient dragon rushed in because of an emergency and accidentally slapped me, seriously injuring me. It took me several decades to recover. Seeing this, Duque almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The glorious image represented by the term queen began to collapse in Duque's heart. The last message was, actually, I can use a secret method to go back and see what happened to me in the past. I'm sorry for last night, and thank you for making me feel better. I've told the little ones that the Red Dragon Army's principle is not to intervene in the conflicts of the mortal races. But, What followed was a string of cryptic dragon language. After reading it with the system's translation, Duque suddenly felt like he had found a treasure. Ha ha ha. I've worked so hard for so long. Saving you was not in vain, Alex Strassa. Chapter 543. Duque used a disguise called makeup, but unfortunately, the disguise technology in this era was too poor. In the end, he still went to the meeting with big panda eyes. The group of kings were all laughing. The current Dalajan was not the same as the floating city in the future. The Dalajan city was located on the southern shore of Lake Lord Emir, and there was still a lot of space. However, even though every state guest house was a standalone villa, for safety reasons, they were all in the same district. Last night, Duque's side was so noisy that a certain Windrunner's second son used a thunder arrow. It was impossible not to let others know. Of course, because no one deliberately asked about it, not many people cared about Duque's private affairs. Everyone just thought that Duque's ship had failed. With Duque's current status, it was not a big deal if he failed. No one thought that Duque would have a relationship that crossed races. For example, almost everyone knew about Dai Lin, and the female elf mage called Gina Goldsword. So what? In the eyes of the high nobles, lovers were just a matter of taste. As long as the wife wasn't of the same social status, she wouldn't be able to show off in public. Speaking of which, at Duque's level, there were not many women who were good enough for Duque. All the kings looked at Duque with a playful expression, as if they wanted to see which family's princess or Grand Duke's daughter Duque would marry in the end. The Alliance Kings meeting naturally prioritized business. After everyone arrived, they immediately started a tense discussion. Tyrion first introduced the situation. The Horde's message delivery is obviously much slower than the Alliance's. After losing the Red Dragon Army's assistance, the Horde lost all means of rapid communication. Even now, the 100,000 Horde entrenched on the east side of the Wall of Thoradin still have no signs of retreating. According to our estimates, the Wolf cavalry messengers from Grim Battle Fortress will only arrive at the front lines of the Wall of Thoradin tonight, or even tomorrow morning at the earliest. King Salas Trollbane, who was the most nervous, immediately slammed his fist on the map table. What are we waiting for? We need to launch an all-out attack before these green-skinned creatures escape. We need to wipe them out in the earthy highlands. As the newly born ruler of a fallen kingdom, Salas was the most nervous of them all. On the contrary, Lang, whose country had been subjugated for a year, seemed even calmer. Of course, in terms of the desire to restore the country, the two kings were equally matched. However, Salas's proposal did not receive much support from the other rulers or representatives. Everyone could see the decline of the Horde, and the recovery of the earthy highlands was a sure thing. The question was how and at what cost. In the Alliance, every country had their own political and economic demands. Everyone knew that they had to defeat the Horde, or else no one would have a good time. Unfortunately, after fighting for so long, even a rich country like the Rotterdam Kingdom felt the pinch, let alone the weaker countries. Just as Salas' face turned livid, Anduin said, "The price to pay is too high. Should we consider waiting for the Horde at the front lines to receive the news of the collapse of the rear, and launch an all-out attack while their morale is down? We can chase after the Horde's butts, just like chasing rabbits. That would be much easier." As soon as Anduin's voice fell, a few kings of the Alliance immediately agreed. Unfortunately, the bronze-bearded dwarves of Cosmodin did not agree. After confirming that the Horde was defeated in the wetlands, Muradin Bronzebeard, who had rushed over on his griffin, grumbled, Hey, are you sure you can annihilate these hundreds of thousands of orcs in the earthy highlands? Don't chase all the orcs back to Cosmodin after you've had your fun chasing rabbits. Then we bronze-bearded dwarves will be in trouble." Kudrin Wildhammer naturally chimed in, "Yes, the earthy highlands and the wetlands are fine, but once we enter the mountains of Cosmodin, the power of our griffins will be greatly reduced." Anduin stole a glance at Duque, and saw that Duque nodded slightly. He immediately felt confident. "Then we can make some slight changes. With the Dalajan Mage's teleportation spell, and the transportation of the Griffin Knights, We can send about 2,000 elites to Torrential Fortress. Then, this group of elites will quickly march east and regain control of the position on the north bank of Solder Bridge. Then we can. Anduin smacked his fist against his palm. Everyone knew that this was like catching a turtle in a jar. King Soras immediately perked up. Even though he knew that this would be a costly operation, the benefits of this operation were obvious. The Horde would completely lose the last organized frontline army. Torrential Fortress can send 400 knights. Stormwind can send 300 knights, King Lang added. Alterac can send 200 knights. The one who spoke was General Haas. Even though the Alterac kingdom only existed in name, this great soldier had been working hard to wash away the shame of the badge on his chest. Kurtiris can send 200 elite soldiers who are familiar with the operation of the ballistae. Dalen also added, of course, it could be said that the remaining human ballistae in the northern position could be used. However, his positive response still surprised the leaders of the other countries. Since the start of the war, Kurtiris had been acting like he only cared about the navy. The two dwarves looked at each other. The dwarves can send 300 secret room guards. Huel Salus can send 300 rangers. King Tarinas could not sit still anymore. He gritted his teeth and said, Rotterdam can send 500 knights. This time, it was the 10 countries of the alliance. Every country had sent troops. After some discussion, Lothar, who was the best at fighting, personally led the team. They changed from a simple airborne landing to a ground assault team to directly attack Solder Bridge. This was because they could still go straight to Torrential Fortress from South Shore along the beach on the east coast. King Salas swore that there was a secret passage in Torrential Fortress that led directly to Solder Bridge. Hence, the plan eventually became a commando team of 5,000 people to block the escape route of the tribe. Then, Mograine would lead the 200,000 human troops to attack from the front, trapping the tribe from the front and back. Originally, the Alliance's army on the west side of the Wall of Thoradin had always been in a state of combat readiness. Even their rations had been packed long ago, so it did not take long to prepare. On the contrary, the planning of the commando team caused a lot of brain cells to die. The leaders of the various countries had already intentionally or unintentionally ignored Duque, because Duque's contributions were too great. Who knew that Duque had secretly made his presence known? When Anduin and Lang privately asked Duque about the plan, Duque nonchalantly said, You guys go ahead and fight. If you can't, I'll be the backup. What kind of protection? I'll ask the Red Dragon army to wash the ground with dragon breath. Pfft. Anduin and Lang both spat. Chapter 544. F***CK. So, all the trouble we went through was just to flirt with a blind man. All for nothing? Anduin and Lang's mouths were so wide open that they could fit an apple. When they sneaked over with the plan, they saw Duque dozing off. In fact, they wanted to comfort Duque. After all, many old politicians who had been in politics for decades could fail miserably before they retired. Duque's influence was too great. Although there was no suppression within the alliance, the kings had already begun to downplay Duque's influence. After all, in the eyes of the kings, it was still unknown whether the alliance would continue to exist after defeating the Horde. When the time came, their own soldiers would all worship the hero of the Horde, and there would be nowhere to cry. When it came to a mission with a higher chance of success, everyone intentionally excluded Duque from the operation. Alright, if you don't bring Duque along, Duque will not care. Everyone knew that the Crimson Dragon army was a force that broke the rules. It could be said that if the extraordinary dragon army really did help one side, the other side would not even have to fight. It was not that Tarinas had not tried to get in touch with the Crimson Dragon army, but he could not find a way. It was not that Antonidas did not know Crassus's true identity. When he tried to test him in private, Crassus rejected him harshly. The Crimson Dragon army has been adhering to the principle of not participating in the wars of other races for tens of thousands of years. Unless there is a crisis that threatens the entire world, the Crimson Dragon army will not intervene. Since no one mentioned it, they tacitly excluded the Crimson Dragon army when they were thinking about strategy and tactics. Alright, Everyone here thought that the Crimson Dragon army would not participate in the war. But on the other side, Duque said that he could let the Crimson Dragon army protect him? At this moment, Anduin and Lang were both dumbfounded. The sleepy Duque, who was still yawning, secretly said, "The Crimson Dragon army not participating in the wars of the mortal world doesn't mean that the WRMS are not allowed to seek revenge on their enemies, right?" The two leaders of Stormwind had a very interesting expression on their faces. Damn, wasn't this like letting the magistrates do whatever they wanted, but not the people? Was this against the principles? No, the Red Dragon army really didn't participate in the battle. But our queen has been tortured by the tribe for so long. Isn't it okay to seek revenge? Since the boss Alexstrasza had secretly given the order, wouldn't the queen's worshippers rush over to Duque's side to listen to his orders? The list that Duque secretly showed to Lang and Anduin almost blinded them. There were as many as 10 primordial giant dragons on standby at any time. And there were as many as hundreds of thousand-year-old giant dragons. Moreover, they only listened to Duque and Stormwind's orders. All right, with such a group of inhumane giant dragons holding the line, if the Alliance still couldn't win against a mere 100,000 tribes that had lost their will to fight, then the Alliance should just jump into the endless ocean and drown themselves. Anduin patted Duque's shoulder. "Have a good rest for the next few days. I'll see you at the celebration party." Yes, there was no doubt about the outcome of this battle. It had to be said that if Duque hadn't appeared in this life, Anduin Lothar would undoubtedly be the most brilliant military strategist of this era. Within 3 days, Anduin's 5,000 commandos withstood a total of 182 joint attacks from 100,000 orcs in the north and 5,000 orcs in the south. They were firmly nailed to the Sodder Bridge. They didn't even give Duque's Red Dragon army a chance to attack. When Mograine arrived with his army, everything was set in stone. The Dark Portal 2, September 18th. The once fallen earthy highlands were recovered. The Stormguard Kingdom's flag was once again raised on the ruins of the Torrent Fortress. September 25th. The northernmost wetlands of the southern continent were recovered. October 10th. The Iron Furnace Fortress, which had been besieged for more than a year, was finally released. Although they didn't run out of food and ammunition, they were still in dire straits. The orcs once gathered a group of 100,000 orcs and laborers in an attempt to block the Alliance's advance with tight fortifications. This tactic of pillbox warfare, learned from the humans, brought great trouble to the Alliance. More than 20,000 Alliance soldiers were shot to death by the trolls' javelins in front of the pillbox. However, with the Red Dragon army's seemingly random entrance, all the tribal pillboxes and arrow towers were reduced to rubble like toys. Arrow towers are awesome, aren't they? Giant dragons were sent flying with a single slap. Shooting arrows from the bunker was fun, right? Come, let the Red Dragon flamethrower teach you a lesson. Under the crushing pressure of the completely asymmetrical forces, the tribe quickly collapsed. October 16th. Under the cover of Kurtiras and the Stormwind fleet, the 150,000 soldiers of the two countries landed on Stormwind City and the north coast of the Western Wilderness. When the Alliance opened up the second battlefield, it officially announced the start of the Stormwind War. Originally, King Delin thought that this would be a very difficult landing battle. He even personally landed at Storport with Lang. He deployed 10,000 Marines from Kurtiras, who were best at landing battles, but they didn't meet with much resistance. Stormwind City was garrisoned by a second-rate clan with only 30,000 people. They had less than 20,000 soldiers who could fight. After paying close to 10,000 casualties in the street battles, Stormwind City was reclaimed. However, the next problem was logistics. Looking at Stormwind City, which had experienced a second war and had been reduced to rubble, Delin frowned deeply. When he asked Lang about the food, Lang smiled. "Sorry, my good friend, to keep it a secret from you until now. In fact, in the past year, a lot of the food in Hillsbrad has been provided by the Western Wilderness. We have already arranged a guerrilla force of close to 10,000 people. While they attack the orcs, they also ensure the food supply this time. It can be said that even if no food is sent over, we can still survive this winter." Delin was tongue-tied. With sufficient logistical supplies, the Stormwind army advanced at lightning speed. On the 30th of October, except for the Redridge Mountains, the entire Stormwind army had been reclaimed. Unfortunately, the Horde had deployed a few second-rate clans from the Dark Portal, and they were engaged in a tug-of-war with the Stormwind army in the mountains. At this time, the Alliance's northern route included the newly joined Gnome Kingdom Gnomerigan. There were a total of 300,000 soldiers from 9 kingdoms, and they pushed the front line to the burning steppes in the future. At the Blackrock Spire, Orgrim gathered the last of the Horde's forces, 150,000 soldiers, and 100,000 orc laborers. Both sides knew that the Blackrock Spire would be the final battleground. On the 1st of November, the Horde sent a messenger and issued a request for a decisive battle. 5 days later, under the Blackrock Spire, let us decide the fate of the Horde and the Alliance. Chapter 545. The west wind was chilly, and the autumn wind made everything on the burning steppes seem even drier. The dry and barren land emitted an endless amount of heat. The source of the heat was naturally the active volcanoes on the steppes, including the Blackrock Mountain in the northwest of the burning steppes. These volcanoes continuously spewed lava, and the scorching lava changed the landscape of the steppes almost every second. Great Chief Orgrim sat on the eastern platform of the Blackrock Spire on the Blackrock Mountain. He looked at the scenery in the distance blankly. Although it was called the Blackrock Spire, it wasn't obvious from the outside. This was because the entire spire was embedded in the towering Blackrock Mountain. Dozens of streams of hot lava flowed down from the lava vents on the mountain, creating mini vertical lines that divided the gray-black Blackrock Mountain into many parts. The so-called Blackrock Spire was actually more appropriate to call it the Blackrock Fortress. Orgrim didn't know that the platform he was sitting on would become the burial ground of the Black Dragon Prince, Nefarian. He just stared blankly at the scenery outside the platform. To the north was the scorching canyon, which was also emitting a high temperature. The Dark Iron Dwarves, who had recently reached an agreement with the Horde, were working in crude furnaces in the canyon, forging weapons for the Horde day and night. To the south was the burning steppes. More than 150,000 orc warriors were camping on the slightly flat ground at the foot of the Blackrock Mountain. These orcs, who had just crossed the Dark Portal and arrived in the world of Azeroth, didn't know the terror of the Alliance and the Red Dragon Army. They were waiting for the arrival of the Battle of Glory. The 100,000 orc laborers were also excited to be given high-quality weapons. They felt that this was a chance to change their status. At this time, the chief of the Dragonmaw clan, Zulid, arrived. He looked at Orgrim, who was sitting on the edge of the platform, and said rudely, "Great Chief, the new warriors of the Horde hope that you can go and say a few words." "Say a few words? I'll go. But not now." Orgrim didn't even turn his head. "Why? Do you know that our people are impatient? After all, they all drank that stuff." "Yeah. Perhaps we should thank the Devil's Blood for making the beastmen violent and belligerent, and we don't have to worry about their morale being low." Orgrim did not bother to hide his sarcasm. "Yes, it is because of the demon's blood that we beastmen still have absolute confidence in our victory. We can even tolerate a bastard like me sitting on the seat of the great chieftain, instead of a brave warrior using Makara to kill me." Zuluhid was silent, looking out from the Blackrock Tower. Most of the orcs below were newcomers to Azeroth. They had never experienced the helplessness of not being able to win despite having the upper hand. They had never experienced the pain and despair of being killed by humans step by step, after occupying more than half of the continent. Where were the clans that used to be the strongest in the tribe? The Blackrock clan could almost be declared extinct. After experiencing the burning of the Elven Forest, the burning of Stormwind City, the crossing of the sea, and the Battle of Lordaeron City, as well as the Blacktooth clan, which had split from the Blackhand brothers, the Blackrock clan, which used to be the strongest clan in the past, had nearly 300,000 people and 200,000 warriors. Now there were less than 5,000 people left in the clan. They could not even compare to a third-rate clan. Under the leadership of the Blackhand brothers, the Blacktooth clan was first tricked by Duque in the Earthy Highlands. Then, after chasing after Gul'dan, they killed a few thousand people from the Storm Predator clan, and then disappeared. Everyone knew that the Black Hand brothers did it on purpose. More than half of the Warsong clan had collapsed. The remaining clansmen, under the leadership of Grom, hid in the deep mountains of the Tirisful woodlands. The Bloodring clan had also collapsed. They had basically lost to Dan Maluo's Iron Furnace castle. Most of them had died in the siege battle. Recently, they had carried out the Great Chieftain's fortress strategy and wiped out the Red Dragon army. There were less than 10,000 clansmen left under Kilrog Deadeye. The Frostwolf clan had been exiled by Gul'dan to the Alterac Mountains in the northern continent before the war. After Durotan was killed, the Frostwolf clan had completely cut off contact with the Horde. Under the Red Dragon army's betrayal, the Dragonmaw clan suffered the most tragic massacre. There were less than 1,000 people left under Zuluhid. The Fireblade clan had always been a clan with few people. After Darrow Triple Bloodblade and Samuro died in battle, the Sword Saint team also suffered heavy losses. There were less than 10 Sword Saints left in the Horde. The former Storm Predator clan and the Twilight Hammer clan, which were dominated by ogres, did not even need to be mentioned. Who knew where those bastards had run off to? The Black Scar clan. After Kashdrak died in battle at Grimbader Fortress, and most of his clansmen were killed by the enraged Red Dragon, it was rumored that Kashdrak's trusted aide took the next chief, the young Nazgul, and crossed the Earthy Highlands to seek refuge with the Frostwolf clan before the Alliance launched a counterattack. The Shattered Palm clan was still alright. Kargath Bladefist, the battle maniac, had even asked the Great Chieftain for a battle yesterday. However, any beast man with a bit of brain knew that the Horde was going to lose. Orgrim had no intention of making things difficult for his deputy. He let out a long sigh. I am thinking about the meaning of this war that we are about to lose. Meaning? Yes. Orgrim raised his head and looked towards the northern sky. The first year of the Dark Portal that the humans spoke of was the most magnificent and glorious year for the entire Horde. The Horde's territory expanded crazily towards the entire north. The territory that they had opened up was almost equivalent to the entire territory known to our world. This was also the year when the entire Horde's fighting spirit was at its strongest, and the chief's ambition was the most inflated. Thanks to the veterans who had experienced the war with the Draenei, it was these elites that easily crushed the resistance of the Stormwind tribe. However, just like all dreams had a beginning and an end, the Horde's arrogant dream of conquering the entire world of Azeroth within 3 years reached its peak in this year. However, in the second year, they crashed into the cold and cruel wall of reality. It seemed like a coincidence, but in reality, it was inevitable that they would fall apart. Orgrim let out a deep sigh. In retrospect, even without Duke Marcus, we would have definitely failed. Why? Zuluhid did not understand. Orgrim's rugged face was filled with regret. We were too arrogant. In the beginning, we massacred almost all the intelligent races that could be seen in this world. We pushed almost all of the intelligent races to the opposite side of the Horde. If I could go back in time, and if I could control the Horde earlier, I would have used gentler methods. For example, I would have first occupied all the areas in the wilderness where there were no intelligent races living. Then, I would have eliminated those weak races to create more living space for the Horde. Finally, when we have obtained an absolute advantage, we would then destroy any alliances that might appear. Chapter 546. Zulid gritted his teeth. No one can go back to the past. Orgrim spread out his hands. But I can leave my experience and insights to the next chief. The one who can truly lead the tribe out of the world we are destined to destroy. The one who can truly bring the tribe to prosperity. Zulid narrowed his eyes. Are you going to commit suicide like a coward? Or are you going to give up on leading us? Neither. I want to use my own methods to leave as much vitality as possible for the tribe. Orgrim smiled mysteriously. In this world, no one knew what Orgrim's plan was, except for one person, Duque. For the first time, Anduin Lothar, who was in charge of the army, had a disagreement with Duque. After recovering Stormwind City, Anduin rushed back to the main force of the alliance in the north. However, when he received many reports from the elven forest, he frowned deeply. At this time, the hundreds of thousands of troops had been divided into two groups. The main force gathered in the barren land east of the Scorching Canyon, ready to advance head-on. The other group, which consisted of only 50,000 dwarves, gathered in the area of Loch Moden, where the Iron Furnace Fort was located. They were ready to go through the huge tunnel that the dwarves had built for many years, and directly pass through the belly of the mountain. At the critical juncture of launching an all-out attack, Anduin, who was in the camp of the Baron Lord, thought for a long time, and chose to summon Duque directly using magic. Duque arrived as promised. "Why, Duque, are you worried about me controlling the army in the direction of Stormwind?" Duque smiled as he entered the tent, only to find that Anduin was alone. Anduin's face was unusually serious. "In Goldshire Town, in Blackwell, and near the East Cove Sawmill, my men have received reports of you allowing your subordinates to kill orc women and children." Duque's heart skipped a beat. What was going to happen had finally happened, but Duque did not regret it. "Is that so? I only request that every warrior visit the settlement that was destroyed by the orcs, and see the remains of the women who were holding their babies after being hacked in half by the orcs with axes. What you're doing is provoking the people's hatred towards the beastmen. I don't care if you're targeting the beastmen warriors, but allowing the beastmen women and children to be slaughtered is not in line with the spirit of a knight. First, please tell me, on what basis should we treat a barbarian race that has massacred the human race kindly? Secondly, if you insist on sparing the women and children of the beastmen, then 10 or 20 years later, when a new batch of beastmen grows up and raises their butcher knives against the humans again, what will you do? Do we have to tell Prince William? Oh, Prince William, in the name of chivalry, do not kill orc women and children. That way, it would be more convenient for those little bastards to grow up and slaughter humans again." Duque's words made Anduin speechless. "Anduin, we're facing an extremely ferocious and barbaric race. Don't forget that orcs, trolls, and ogres are all part of the horde. But if we abandon the virtues that humans should have, then what's the difference between us humans and orcs?" Anduin argued. "Virtue is destined to be an ideal that cannot be attained by everyone. I don't deny the spirit of a knight, but I'm a very practical mage. I only acknowledge races and civilizations that can be communicated with reason. Anduin, you can remove my position as the Alliance's deputy commander, and even let Lang remove my duke title. But if you want to stop me from cleaning up the orcs, please bring an army of 200,000. As soon as Duque finished speaking, Anduin fell into a deep dilemma. Anduin was very clear that he could not let the Alliance let go of their hatred. Most of the 11 countries in the Alliance had been tormented by the Horde. More than 1 million humans had died at the hands of the Horde. However, it was not in line with the oath of a knight to allow the Alliance's soldiers to wantonly seek revenge. Faced with Duque's strong opposition, Anduin knew that if he could not convince Duque, it would be impossible to stop the spread of the racial massacre. At this time, as Duque had expected, King Lang came in from outside the tent. Lang spoke very earnestly. "Duque, I don't want to directly refute your approach with reason. I just want to hear your opinion on the Horde." After a few seconds of silence, Duque spoke in a deep voice. "Do you know how many tribes are left on the mainland now? Do you know how many places on the mainland there are for the Horde to thrive and thrive if we can't clean up the Horde?" "No, you don't know, but I know." "Dow." Anduin and Clan's expressions immediately turned solemn. The Warsong clan, the Frostwolf clan, and the various troll clans that might join the Horde were all pointed out by Duque on the big map. Kargath, Flaming Peak, Stonard, Gromgul. These tribal strongholds that were almost natural in Duque's game memory, naturally, had a different meaning in front of Anduin, the military strategist. Looking at these barbarian lands that had been ignored by most people, if left unattended, would become the perfect breeding ground for the rise of the Horde. Anduin and Lang were finally moved. Duque's last reason was the final blow to the balance in Anduin's heart. Think about it. Did Thoradin the Great count the women and children of the trolls as weak, In this era, no matter what, humans acted according to Thoradin the Great. Perhaps the spirit of chivalry was very noble and very admirable, but compared to the common ruler of mankind, Thoradin the Great, it was obvious who was more important. Lothar was indeed a very noble person, and Duque did not want to destroy his faith, but Duque had to do so, because after the alliance won, according to history, King Tyrrhenus would implement a very F***-kept-up policy to prohibit the alliance from killing the horde captives. This was Tyrrhenus' evil plan to use the spirit of chivalry to exhaust the other countries of the alliance. Unless they found an excuse to leave the alliance, they would be overwhelmed by the ever-increasing cost of the shelter. Those countries that truly had the spirit of chivalry and humanitarianism would become a tiger in their own bosom. King Tyrrhenus, who originally wanted to take advantage of the situation, was also defeated when he met the fallen Arthas. Duque finally understood. Of course, he hated the violent old tribe to the core, and wanted nothing more than to kill everyone in the tribe. Unfortunately, the orcs were like cockroaches that could not be killed. It was impossible to completely wipe out the horde in such a big world, so he had to at least reduce the living space of the new horde, and try his best to keep the new horde under control. He did not want to have the chance to destroy the alliance at every turn, or have a stupid chief roar that would affect the city's appearance and cause trouble for the alliance. That was a long story. More recently, Duque's focus was on the second battle of the Dark Portal. In this battle, according to the original history, the alliance hero that Duque respected the most, Anduin Lothar, would be killed by Orgrim. Chapter 547. That's right. In the original history, Lothar would die. The cause of his death was his most trusted godly sword. This godly sword wasn't widely recognized in the alliance as the king's sword that was inherited from Thoradin the Great. Or rather, the king's sword that was announced to the public was just a cover to hide the true identity of the godly sword. About 25,000 years ago, the godly sword Dark Judge was split into two pieces after the Titan war god Sargeras betrayed it. One was Tisharich, in the hands of Agrama the Avenger, and the other was Garibler, in the hands of Sargeras the Destroyer. When Sargeras the Destroyer tried his best to get Tisharich and merge it into Galslark to summon the Dark Judge to destroy the Pantheon, Father of the Gods Al-Mansur proposed to forge a weapon that could compete with Galslark. However, this would be extremely difficult. The Dark Judge was a combination of good and evil, so what should the newly forged weapon be? Completely bright and completely good. Roaring Thunder Gugneus found the best forging materials in the universe. Forger Kaz Goros began to forge this powerful weapon, a godly sword. Dreamweaver Noganon used almost all of his power to enchant it. Agrama the Avenger injected his noble soul into the sword, and the sword was called Iskini Punisher. Just as the sword was about to be completed, things changed. Sargeras the Destroyer led the Burning Legion to attack the Pantheon, and the gods used all their strength to finally complete this weapon. This newly completed weapon was ejected out of the Pantheon due to the force that erupted during the interruption, and was left in the newly created Azeroth. Although the gods wanted to find this sword, because of the Burning Legion, they had to deal with the enemy in front of them first. After a long time, this matter was gradually forgotten. More than 20,000 years later, 3 travelers found this weapon in an abandoned cave. They were Lang Rin, the Guardian Medivh, and Anduin Lothar. Only the most noble of men could wield this sword. Fortunately, one of the 3 had it, and that was Anduin Lothar. This was the difference from the history that Duque was familiar with. The moment the sword acknowledged Lothar as its master, it suddenly fused with the king's sword that Lothar had inherited from his ancestors. Most of the time, the sword that appeared in front of others was still that seemingly thin, but beautifully crafted one-handed sword. However, when Noxus needed to fight or had a thought, the sword would quickly transform in a flash of golden light. It had transformed into a gigantic 2-handed broadsword, and it was imbued with a divine aura. It was as if it would slay any evil. The Guardian Medivh gave this sword a name, Quel'Zarim. In Sargeras, it meant the sword of nobility. This sword woke up from its 25,000-year slumber. Later, Anduin Lothar used this sword to kill his way into Karazhan. Fortunately, Duque also obtained the temporary approval of this divine sword. He used this sword to stab Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, and sent Sargeras' soul into a bottomless abyss. However, this sword had a fatal weakness. It could not be used against people of noble character. When the wielder used it against a noble person, it would lose its divine power. No one would have thought that the leader of the ferocious orc army, the orc leader who started a bloody massacre on the Azeroth continent, Great Chief Orgrim, was actually a noble person. That's right. Although Orgrim had caused countless killings, the starting point of all his actions was for the continuation of his race. In the end, he was judged as a noble person by Quel'Zerim, and refused to release his invincible divine power. This happened at the most crucial moment of the battle between Noxus and Orgrim. It could be said that success was noble, and failure was also noble. Because of his noble character, Noxus was able to master Quel'Zerim. He led the army to fight in the Silverpine Forest, and it could be said that he was invincible. Other than Grom Hellscream, who had Bloodhowl, no one was a match for him. However, during the duel with Orgrim, Quel'Zerim was degraded to ordinary iron. In the end, it was smashed by Orgrim's semi-divine weapon, Hammer of Destruction. This hammer not only smashed the exterior of Quel'Zerim, but it also hit Noxus' chest. Noxus died because of this hammer. In life, 9 out of 10 things did not go your way. The longer you lived, the more you would feel that you had missed out on too many things, and left behind too many regrets. After transmigrating, if any of the familiar faces around him died forever, Duque would feel that he could not accept it, let alone Duque's most respected hero, Anduin Lothar. From the time Duque was penniless to the time Duque rose to power, Lang and Duque had given Duque too much support. She had never dragged him down. She would do her best and not hold back. Even if in this life, because of Duque's efforts, Lang did not die, and Duque did not have to lick King Terenas' boots and beg for a chance of survival for William, who had lost his father. And Duque did not have the glorious record of fighting alone at the front line of the alliance. This did not affect Anduin's noble character. Ever since he became the commander of the alliance, Anduin had never deliberately favored any country's army in any military operation. Those who were capable would be promoted, and those who were incapable would be relegated. Even though Terenas had hinted many times that he hoped the army of the Rotterdam Kingdom would get better missions, Anduin ignored him. It was precisely because of his fairness that he set a good example for the entire alliance. Hence, there was a real atmosphere of equality within the alliance. Hence, no matter from which perspective, Duque had no reason to let Anduin die in the hands of Orgrim. There was a problem. If he wanted to seize the last opportunity to weaken the tribe, he had to seize the opportunity now. Slaughtering the tribe was obviously dishonorable for most of the knights, and it would definitely cause a conflict with Anduin and the others. If his nobility was tarnished, Anduin Lothar would no longer be the same Anduin Lothar. On the other hand, since Duque had chosen to save Anduin's life, Anduin would definitely not allow Duque to assassinate Orgrim when the bastard chose to surrender for the sake of the continuation of the orcs. Even if Duque had saved Anduin's life, he would let so many orcs survive by sucking away the finances of the alliance, and then shout the classic, "Orcs will never be slaves," after 10 years. That made Duque very unhappy. What should he do to have the best of both worlds? Duque first used the hatred of the people to attack Anduin and Lang's hearts, and then used the name Thoradin the Great to lower their psychological bottom line. Finally, he used his ultimate move against the orcs. Chapter 548. Family planning was our basic national policy. Anduin was a warrior. Although Lang was well versed in all aspects, he was not very good at internal affairs. Neither of them saw through Duque's insidiousness. No, it was wisdom. At the end of the day, this wasn't the era of Azeroth where technology was everywhere. After seeing the Draenei and absorbing the technology from the Pantheon, all kinds of crazy things appeared in Azeroth. Especially when the Burning Legion entered, and even the Floating Universe fleet came. Now it was still an era of cold weapons. In the era of cold weapons, to a large extent people were used. Without underlings, no matter how powerful Thrall was in the future. Did you think you could destroy the alliance of 10 million people with 300 red underpants? How was the new tribe formed? In the end, the alliance went too far and left too many orcs. Although they used enslavement, and even used some of the orcs as gladiators, they did not control the number of orcs well, and did not notice the rise of the remaining orcs. As a result, the Frost Wolves and Warsong clans that were hiding in the dark rose again, and rescued the orcs that were locked up everywhere. Then, they escaped the Alliance's pursuit, and turned to the Kalimdor continent across the endless ocean. So when Duque first scared Lang and Anduin, the soul of the best actor arrived. It can be foreseen that the threat of the tribe will continue to exist for decades, or even hundreds of years. If we do not handle it well, it will bring disaster to the entire Rin family, and the descendants of the people of Stormwind. Duque's words made Lang's heart ache. Anduin clenched his fist. Is there no better way? Duque, for the sake of the kindness of humans. Anduin did not mention the holy light, because mages did not believe in it. The best actor Duque looked up 45 degrees, and his eyes lost focus as if he had seen the sky outside through the tent. Well, since you insist on the justice and chivalry in your hearts, I will give in a little. Let me think. 5 minutes later, Duque started writing and revising. Then he spent another 10 minutes writing a rough family planning policy. First, in principle, they would not kill any captives. Secondly, an adult female orc was only allowed to give birth to one child. After giving birth, she had to undergo a vasectomy. Third, the husbands of all beastmen mothers must fight for the alliance, and clear out any beastmen or trolls who stubbornly resisted. Every year, they must hand over at least one frost wolf, or Warsong tribe beastman's head. Otherwise, the female beastmen and their children who were held hostage will be punished differently. For sit together. Any beastmen who dared to escape would be punished according to the clan's rules. If one escaped, 10 would be executed. If 10 escaped, 100 would be executed. If 100 escaped, their entire clan would be executed. After writing, Duque exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. As a transmigrator, he knew very well how powerful Sar would become in the future. He did not remember who had picked up Sal, but he could have used his power to kill Sal. Even if he failed, it would take more time for the tribe to rise again, after losing the number of people. Then, it would depend on how much vitality the Alliance could preserve in the third battle of the Dark Portal. After Duque made a compromise, Lang and Anduin heaved a sigh of relief. They saw Duque as the core of the future of Stormwind. Of course, they did not want Duque to have a fundamental conflict with them over such a small matter. Lang looked through it repeatedly and nodded. All right, if that's the case, I think it would be easier for the other countries to accept it. At this time, Duque brought up another matter. Anduin, may I ask if your sword can only attack enemies without noble character? Anduin frowned. He did not know what Duque meant. Yes, that's right. My sword will never be pointed at the kind. If, I said if. What if the chief of the tribe or Grim is a noble person who cares for the whole tribe? What would happen if your king's sword clashed with his hammer of destruction? A demigod weapon. Anduin furrowed his brows tightly. He did not understand why Duke would raise such a hypothesis in such a neurotic manner. When he asked again, Duque just laughed it off. Anduin could only bury the doubts in his heart. After getting rid of that little interlude, Anduin finally focused all his energy on the battle. Originally, if Stormwind could break through the triangular junction in the Redridge Mountains and cut off the orcs' reinforcements from the Dark Portal to the Blackrock Spire, the battle would undoubtedly be much better. Unfortunately, the tribe had realized it too. When Stormwind reclaimed the Elven Forest and the Twilight Forest, they had started to build tunnels in the Redridge Mountains. A large number of tunnels that extended in all directions ran through the entire mountain area. In order to prevent the ancient dragons from destroying the entire mountain area, the orcs had even placed a large number of rolling stones in the caves. In case of a fire attack or a flood, the orcs could simply stuff the round boulders in. Unless there was an extremely great pressure, Neither the dragon's breath nor the flood would be able to enter the mountain. To pass through the triangular junction? Sure, they could use humans to fight the orcs in the tunnels. Before Duke could gather enough dwarves or gnome warriors, using humans to fight a tunnel battle with the orcs would be a battle of attrition, and it would be a huge loss. In the narrow tunnels, the orc warriors could unleash their maximum combat power. It was a similar situation in the Blackrock Spire. Originally, Duke asked the Red Dragon Legion to help clear a wave of orcs outside. After losing thousands of people, Orgrim waved his hand, and almost all the orcs squeezed into the Blackrock Spire. The Blackrock Spire was not built according to the size of a dragon. It used to be the territory of the Dark Iron Dwarfs. 230 years ago, during the War of the Three Hammers, the Dark Iron Dwarfs were exiled to the Redridge Mountains after they lost. Later, the king of the Dark Iron Dwarfs, Emperor Tharisin, and his witch wife led an army to launch a counterattack. They actually divided their army into two groups to attack the Bronzebeard Dwarves of Ironforge and the Wildhammer Dwarves who were still in grim battle at the time. The defeated Dark Iron tribe summoned the Fire Elemental King, Ragnaros, who had been exiled for a long time. Unexpectedly, the whole tribe was enslaved by Ragnaros. The opening of the Elemental Plane Rift caused a major disaster to the entire Azeroth. It also changed the terrain rapidly. The originally larger Redridge Mountains were separated. Between the Scorching Canyon and the Redridge Mountains, there was now the Burning Steppes and the huge lava volcano that was tens of kilometers long, the Blackrock Mountain. Chapter 549. Interestingly, the Dark Iron Dwarves enslaved by Ragnaros occupied the Blackrock Abyss at the bottom of the Blackrock Mountain. After the orcs conquered Stormwind City, they started to use the lava cave to build and expand the Blackrock Fortress. After hearing that the Iron Furnace Castle's Bronzebeard Dwarves had joined the alliance, the Dark Iron Dwarves joined the tribe without hesitation. They were happy to cause trouble for the Bronzebeard Dwarves, and even came out to build all kinds of weapons and fortifications for the tribe while Ragnaros was still asleep. Hence, the defense of the Blackrock Fortress was quite strong. More than 200,000 orcs squeezed into a fortress. Orgrim was right about the final battle, but what if the orcs lost and defended the fortress? Would the Alliance's army be stuck in the Scorching Canyon? Usually, Lothar's head would explode from thinking about it. What's so difficult about it? If they really dare to retreat, we dwarves will show them. Magni Bronzebeard said loudly. Anduin wasn't ignorant about the dwarves. When he was young, he often went to the Iron Furnace Castle and was old friends with Magni. However, how exactly was he going to see? Not only did Anduin have to be convinced, but he also had to get the approval of the generals of the other countries. At this moment, Duque suddenly said, "Steam siege vehicle?" The eyes of Magni and Jurban Mekatok, who was equivalent to the Gnome King, lit up. They didn't expect there to be someone among the humans who knew about it. And it was one of the big shots in the Alliance, Duque? You know about it too? Magni laughed. Unexpectedly, Duque frowned. Not good. Why not? Jurban was a little unhappy. After all, the steam siege vehicle was one of the greatest masterpieces of the dwarves and the gnomes. It has to be near the fortifications before it can be activated, Duque said with certainty. It can be easily destroyed by the orcs' crude defensive weapons. Magni asked, For example, a giant rolling log that is 100 feet long and 20 feet thick? Duque's random example made Magni and Jurban's expressions change. That's right, the beastmen were animals with immense strength. If that was the case, it would be a little dangerous. Jurban asked, What good idea do you have? Why don't we modify the steam tank and make it look like this? Duke waved his hand, and a 3D projection of a tank model that looked a little like a large box-like dwarf steam tank appeared in front of Magni and Jurban. If there was another transmigrator present, he or she would realize that the tank looked very much like the Su-152 tank destroyer. Of course, with the industrial power of the dwarves in this era, they were forced to abandon the long barrel, but because there was no rotating turret, they could increase the caliber of the main cannon even more crazily. Similarly, in order to defend against attacks from the front, in a situation where the exquisiteness and steel rolling technology were not up to standard, the armor at the front was thicker. After giving up on the rotating turrets, they could add a few more firing holes on the side and install some musketeers to take care of attacks from the side. Both Lothar and Migraine were dumbfounded by the topic that Duke and the dwarf were talking about. Their understanding of the dwarven weapons was very primitive. He always felt that the dwarven tanks could withstand swords and knives, but they were a little weak against heavy weapons such as sledgehammers. For example, on the battlefield, he had seen the orcs smashing the dwarven tanks with tree trunks more than once. But at this time, if they didn't trust the dwarves, they would ask their own soldiers to fight the orcs in the streets. Any commander who cared about his soldiers would not do such a heartless thing. Anduin had been complaining about Duque's suggestion to modify the siege weapons so late. Firstly, the war was imminent, and secondly, there were only 4 days left. Would they make it in time? Magni waved his hand. Don't underestimate the dwarves and gnomes. Such a low-tech modification, we can do it in one night. Magni and Gerben were so confident that even Duque was a little doubtful. Hey, are the dwarves all so strong? One night. It's a steam tank, right? They don't need to recalculate the weight to solve the tank's power system? What about the wheels? What about the tracks? What about the suspension system? Then the next day, Duque was pleasantly surprised amidst a wave of applause and praise. Duque came out with sleepy eyes. Duque was dumbfounded too. F*CK, I want you to be a tank destroyer, not a land cruiser. What the hell is this 10-meter-long metal lump that's almost 2 stories tall, 3 carriages wide, and almost 3 stories tall? Not only was Duque dumbfounded, but the Windrunner sisters' mouths were also wide open. Alright, at least its appearance was perfect. Duque noticed that apart from the front armor, that was really made of steel, the sides were made of wood, and covered with 2 to 3 layers of iron. When Duque walked over, he saw a huge wheel made of pig iron, that was as tall as a man. Even though the outer part of the wheel was mostly covered by the outer armor, Duque could clearly see no tracks. No tracks. No tracks. Important things must be repeated 3 times. Then how will the vehicle turn and pass through complicated terrain? And with such a heavy vehicle, what kind of steam transmission system will it use? With this question in mind, Duque turned to the back of the vehicle to take a look, and almost bit off his own tongue. High-tech my ass. No wonder they said it was a modification, without any technological content. Like hell I'd believe you. Looking through the open back door at the back of the tank, Duque could clearly see at least 100 dwarves chatting and bragging in front of rows of pushers at the bottom of the tank. Right. That's right. It's the pushers used to push the vehicle. It seems like this tank destroyer, that weighs at least a few dozen tons, is being driven by humans. Of course, as long as everyone listened to the commands, it would be fine. Pfft. Duque choked. Perfect. Just then, Magni and Gerben came over with proud faces. The great dwarf craftsman Gerben laughed. How is it? Even though it's a bit rushed, it can definitely meet the requirements for attacking the city. Magni laughed as well. Hee hee. For this big guy, I've specially contributed the biggest cannon in the entire Dan Maluo Empire. You should know that I usually only use my beloved small steel cannon to blow up mountains. Pfft. Please forgive Duque for spitting again. He had underestimated the lunacy of dwarves and gnomes. What the hell is a small steel cannon? On Earth, anything over 20 millimeters was called a cannon. During World War II, the Germans had gone crazy with that 800 millimeters Gustav railway gun. The problem was that the dwarves were 100 times crazier. The caliber of this cannon was measured in meters. Magni stepped forward, tiptoed and patted Duque on the shoulder. I have to thank you for coming up with such a good idea. Without protection, I really wouldn't dare to pull my baby out. Chapter 550. The dwarf's sickness didn't stop there. The cannons of this era didn't have the precision required by the machinery industry. The steel wasn't up to standard, and there were no so-called rifling. So the firing range of this small steel cannon wasn't very far, only about 2 kilometers. Of course, Because the cannonball had something added to it, it wasn't a traditional cannon. According to Magni's translation, with one shot, not even a blade of grass would grow within a 100-meter radius. Alright, next question. How do you load the cannonballs? Why don't I see any loading devices? That's right, the 6-meter-long cannon, with a diameter of about 1.2 meters was fixed to this man-powered tank destroyer. Looking at those huge cannonballs with a diameter of 1 meter, Duque felt his eyelids twitch. This thing weighed at least 3 or 4 tons, right? What else can we do? Use manpower to carry it. Magni snapped his fingers, and a dwarf's secret chamber guard's body suddenly swelled up like a balloon. It was obvious that the guy's armor was specially made. The moment his body grew bigger, the armor disassembled on its own. A good breastplate turned into something like a breastplate. That pair of leather pants was also specially made. The long pants didn't tear, even after being worn into a pair of shorts. Looking at that guy's body glowing with a silver metallic sheen, Duque finally understood. Deity's descent? Yes. Magni smiled. Seems like you understand us dwarves quite well. Deity's descent was another one of the dwarves' sickening racial talents. Dwarves who had awakened this innate skill through rigorous training could achieve a short-term increase in strength, attack power, defense power, and vitality by increasing their size. Fine. Dwarves. Let a few dwarves who awaken Deity's descent to carry the cannonballs. You win. Looking at Duque's expression of admiration, Magni and Gerben laughed happily. Magni suddenly came over and said sneakily, "Oh, it sounds like you know how to use a loading device. Can we discuss it privately later?" Duque's eyes darted around. We're at a stalemate at Redridge Mountain on Stormwind's side. Why don't you send 1,000 secret chamber guards first? Are you kidding me? Currently, the entire Bronzebeard Dwarven clan only had 1,200 secret room guards. No, there's no room for negotiation. Magni's tone was resolute, like an old hen protecting its chicks. A faint smile appeared on Duque's face. Almost as soon as they saw Duque's smile, those who were extremely familiar with Duque's personality, such as Aurelia, already covered their mouths and snickered. Duque was going to scam people again. Then, I'll use the secret of large-scale tank assault. Blitzkrieg in exchange? Blitzkrieg. The name sounded grand. Magni and Gerben pricked up their ears. Over the years, their steam tanks had been ridiculed by outsiders. Useless lump of iron. It was a waste of manpower and resources. He was no match for an orc warrior's 200-pound sledgehammer. With a few strikes of the hammer, the steam tank would fall apart. Not as good as a hammer. No matter how many times Magni and Gerben heard these words, they felt as if needles were stabbing into their hearts. Even though the soul of steampunk was deeply imprinted in their hearts, and they firmly believed that high technology would replace the weak swords, as long as the steam tank didn't prove itself on the battlefield, they and their inventors were destined to be ridiculed by others. Meanwhile, the old-fashioned faction among the dwarves continued to advocate that more energy should be spent on training the most capable dwarven guards in the secret chamber. This made Magni and Gerben very uncomfortable. Now, Duque's words had directly scratched the itch in the depths of their hearts. Duque flipped his hand, and a huge virtual image appeared. It was a huge plane with hundreds of plumes of dust rising from it. If one took a closer look, they would realize that those were actually tanks that were completely different from the dwarven steam tanks. They were charging forward at full speed. They used their high-speed assault ability to swiftly and violently tear apart the enemy's defensive line, circle around the enemy's rear, and annihilate them. Duque's magnetic voice rang out at this moment. Even though I acknowledge that your invention is an epic-making genius invention, it's obvious that your use of tanks is wrong. Tanks have never been a weapon for attacking fortifications or confrontations. Tanks represent firepower and mobility. Mobility is the soul of a tank. Mobility? The two short big shots shuddered. Because the image was too fast, the two couldn't see what kind of enemies the tanks were fighting. But this didn't stop them from opening a new window in their minds. Just as they were about to hear more, Duque was addicted to the suspense and directly closed the image. Wait. Duque didn't care about them. Instead, he continued to tempt them. There are nearly 300,000 human soldiers, and thousands of mages, gathered in the barren lands. If it's a head-on confrontation, when will it be the dwarves' turn to take the lead? By the time your short legs arrive, the battle will have already been fought to the bitter end. Everyone is advancing with infantry, so why should the dwarves take the lead? Magni's face turned the color of a pig's liver. After being beaten up by the orcs at their doorstep for a year, everyone was filled with anger. Originally, Magni could not stand the people of Rotterdam, who regarded themselves as the saviors of the dwarves. Now that Duke mentioned it, Magni immediately felt a little discouraged. Gerben spoke up. Then Duque, do you have any good ideas to help the dwarves and gnomes vent their anger? Take the lead. Duque smiled mysteriously and led the two into a dwarven tent sneakily before saying, "The tribe's chief, Orgrim, has indeed sent a letter of challenge to the Alliance and challenged Lothar to a decisive battle. But Orgrim is very cunning too. He didn't promise to fight to the end. If he can't win, he can't retreat into the Blackstone Fortress. Think about it. If 200,000 orcs retreat into the fortress, how long will it take for the Alliance to take down the Blackstone Fortress? Who will be sent to fight in narrow alleyways like that?" Magni couldn't stay calm at all. The dwarves would definitely send the dwarves, who were best at tunnel warfare, as cannon fodder. Even if Lothar was really kind enough to share the losses of the various countries, it would still be a nightmare for the bronze-bearded dwarves, who had already suffered heavy casualties. It had to be known that Magni had mustered almost all of the adult dwarves who could fight for the sake of revenge in a fit of pique. If the losses were too great, it could be imagined that the bronze-bearded dwarves wouldn't be able to recover for a long time. Chapter 551. Magni wasn't stupid. He knew that if Duque was willing to help the bronze-bearded dwarves like this, Duque would definitely get something in return. But Magni was willing to trust Duque. Duque was just too reliable. Apart from the soldiers who had no choice, Iron Stove Castle had given them almost everything they wanted in the past year. Medicine, food, daily necessities, unsmelted iron ore. Anything Magni asked for. There was nothing Duque couldn't get. If he really couldn't get it, Duque would send a letter to explain his difficulties. Most of the time, the things that were sent were just the right amount, and never in terms of quality or quantity. And during the period of the Iron Stove Castle's war, Duque's name as the god of war had spread throughout the continent. Every time, they would win against the many, and they would defeat the strong with the weak, but they had never lost. If it was Duque, it wouldn't be surprising for him to come up with some groundbreaking ideas. Recently, Duque didn't seem to be having a good time. Rumor had it that because Duque was too outstanding and made the people of Lordaeron lose face, Tyrrhena's formed the King's Alliance to exclude Duque from participating in the final battle. Southwest of the Scorching Canyon, Stormwind was indeed fighting a war to revive the kingdom. It was fine for Duque's 30,000 private soldiers to go back to the Elven Forest. However, with the Red Ridge Mountain completely unable to break through, they summoned Duque, the Alliance's deputy commander, to the main battlefield, but didn't let Duque control any of the troops. What was this? Dwarves were mostly straightforward, and Magni hated these kinds of deceitful political battles. He especially hated the Lordaeron peoples. "I'm your boss, come and worship me" way of doing things. In fact, everyone could see that the orcs were going to kneel sooner or later. If they wanted to have enough say in the alliance after the war, they had to produce a good result in the final battle. Now that Duque wanted to use the dwarves to teach the people of Lordaeron how to fight, why wouldn't the dwarves do it? Magni quickly understood the crux of the matter, and agreed decisively. "Tell us, we'll do it." The gnome craftsman nodded in agreement. "Yes, let's call Kudrin Wildhammer over first. We need to properly tell the tribe what it means to be one in the air and land, and to coordinate our infantry and cannons." Not long after hearing such a new term, Kudrin immediately joined the group. November 6th, the day of the final battle. "The humans are here." Orgrim jerked his head up from his thoughts. The fear in Zulahid's voice angered him. When did his successor become such a coward? We invited them to fight. The great chief roared. He stood on the balcony of the Blackrock Tower and watched everything from above. This balcony was located on a protruding rock at the top of the northern part of Blackrock Mountain. In front of the balcony, he could overlook the entire scorching canyon. From here, he could see the remaining tribesmen and the newly arrived tribesmen gathered below. He still remembered that the last time he looked from here, his warriors had covered the entire scorching canyon and burning plains from the north and south. There was not a single gap between them. But now, between the black rocks, there were only patches of green and a small amount of brown. Orgrim could even tell that the old first-rate tribesmen were sparsely gathered together, while the new second-rate and third-rate tribesmen were more spirited. When did his tribe become so weak? Everything he worried about had become a reality. Everything was falling towards the worst plan he had prepared in his heart. So what if it's a final battle? Can we win? They have a large number of mages, and even a damned red dragon. Zulu had said from behind him. We don't have enough men. This is the last batch of reinforcements. The tribes on the other side of the gate are watching, and there won't be any more reinforcements for a while. Orgrim glared angrily at his second in command. The burning rage in his eyes made every beastman who met his gaze cower. Indeed, their numbers were very small compared to the super army of over 500,000 in the past. The number of beastmen troops no longer had the numbers to sweep through the world. In terms of quality, it was even worse. But so what? In the name of our ancestors, we are beastmen. You're asking us what we should do. He roared at everyone and pulled out the famous hammer of destruction from his back. Of course it's to fight. Before you rode on the dragon's back, you could kill 20 human soldiers in one go without panting. Did you forget what it means to fight after getting off the dragon's back? At this point, Orgrim turned to the new beastmen around him. Your ancestors could kill 10 human soldiers at once. What about you? Do you think you're the children of the ooze monsters? Do you think you're all weaklings? What your ancestors could do, you can do as well. You want to destroy us? Sure, you can kill us with the lives of 5 million soldiers. Leaving behind Zuluhid and the new recruits who were trembling in excitement, Orgrim turned around and walked to the balcony. Warriors of the Horde, listen up. He roared and raised his hammer high. Most of the new beastmen turned around to look at him, but the beastmen who had retreated did not. This enraged him once again, and he smashed the hammer of destruction onto the cliff at the side of the balcony. There was a stream of lava that fell straight down. The blow from the hammer of destruction created a huge wave of heat that reverberated violently. Every single orc at the foot of the mountain immediately cast their gazes over and stared intently at their great chief. Listen to me, he yelled again. I know that we are being defeated and forced to retreat. I also know that our numbers are not as great as before. I also know the heavy losses caused by Gul'dan's betrayal. But don't forget, we are beastmen. In our world, for billions of years, nothing could stop us. We have killed the most savage Gollans and fought against the ogres for hundreds of years. We have lost before, and we have retreated before. But now, we are still the rulers of that world. At this point, the beastman's eyes lit up. Our world is being destroyed, and we have nowhere to retreat to. So I want each and every one of you to remember. At this point, Orgrim took a deep breath and roared with all his might. We are beastmen. We are still the Horde. Our footsteps will make this world tremble. The soldiers below let out excited shouts. Although it sounded a little messy and weak, it did not affect their high morale. The humans chased us here. They thought that we were defeated. They thought that we were afraid of their power, like dogs are afraid of powerful creatures. No, they are wrong. Chapter 552. Orgrim once again raised the hammer of destruction in his hand. The hammer was still stained with magma, and it looked extremely ferocious and dazzling under the rising sun. We are here, because this is our headquarters. The strength of our entire tribe is here. We are here because we can charge out once again and trample this continent under our feet. We can plant the Horde's flag on every inch of this world. So, we can return here and defeat them once again, and make them tremble at our name." At this time, the cheers were loud enough to make the entire scorching canyon boil. Orgrim raised his arms, letting the fanatical cheers wash over him. He saw the horde's warriors standing up and waving their brand new weapons with all their might. The great chief was pleased to see the fighting spirit of his soldiers being ignited once again. "We are the best hunters. We can wait for an opportunity, but we will not wait for death," he said to his soldiers. "We are beast men. We are the horde. We will deal a fatal blow to them. We will make them regret chasing us here. Once we crush their army, we will step on their corpses and rule their land once again." When Orgrim once again swung his hammer above his head, Zulud had already secretly waved his hand. The sound of a huge horn rang out. This deep horn sounded as if it came from the distant past and traveled through the long river of history. Every beast man felt as if their ancestors were staring at them passionately. At this moment, at this moment, at this moment, the cheers pierced through the clouds, causing the entire black rock mountain that Orgrim was standing on to tremble. Orgrim suddenly felt like crying. This was the horde that stood at the top of the world with an unyielding heart. This was the horde that he was willing to give up his life, and even his soul for. Orgrim felt the hot wind brushing against his cheeks. He could no longer tell if it was the heat from the scorching canyon, or the heat from the beastmen's cheers. No matter. These were the people that he loved so much. These were the beastman warriors that he knew. They would not cry because of failure. They would not kneel and beg for mercy because of a disadvantage. Even if they fell, they would only fall in the direction of their charge, and their hands would be stained with the blood of their enemies. When he came down from the balcony, Zulud came up to him and used honorifics, which was rare for someone as rude as him. "Great speech, great chief." Suddenly a voice said, "I hope those little bastards who haven't even seen Gerald won't pee their pants when they see a dragon flying in the sky." The one who spoke was Kilrog Deadeye. As the chieftain of the Bloodring clan who had suffered a great loss after encountering the Red Dragon army in the war, he was obviously filled with resentment. Orgrim glanced at Kilrog and suddenly laughed. "Dragons aren't the only rulers of this world. I swear by the tribe's war flag that this battle has nothing to do with the dragons." Kilrog's single eye narrowed. Orgrim ignored Gilog and turned to Sabek, who had just retreated from the front lines. "Have the warriors of our clan get ready. I will lead my elite team in charge. The others will follow behind." He glanced at the huge hall on the balcony. Standing in the shadows was a large group of huge figures. They were waiting for orders. When Orgrim's gaze swept across them, everyone stood up straight and nodded. Orgrim nodded in response. These were his elite guards. There weren't many of them, only 300, but every member was a two-headed ogre who had experienced the baptism of the Storm Altar. Doomhammer was a noble orc. He used to hate ogres, but the ones in front of him were different. They were much smarter than others of their kind, and they were warriors and not warlocks. More importantly, they were only loyal to Orgrim, and not out of recognition for the tribe. Orgrim knew that they admired his courage and strength. In reality, they saw him as a smaller ogre and promised to follow his orders. At the same time, he respected their strength and understood that if needed, each of them would die for him, just like how he was willing to give up his life for the tribe. Now, the 250,000 orcs would use their lives as a bargaining chip to tie the tribe's victory to the balance of fate. There was only one thing left. Suddenly, an orc rushed over and whispered into Orgrim's ear. "We found Guile and transferred him to another slave master according to your instructions. But is this appropriate?" Orgrim sighed. "According to the prophecy of the Lord in Nagrand, we must leave him with the humans. This is fate." Fate? What a mysterious word. Not far away, Kilrog Deadeye, who had a "I don't want to fight" expression on his face, seemed to have seen something through his eyes that could only briefly see the future. He suddenly picked up his white bone axe made from the fangs of ferocious beasts and stood beside Orgrim. Regardless of victory or defeat, the tribe should not be destroyed here. Orgrim smiled when he heard Kilrog's words. "Let's go." At this moment, on a small hill 3,000 meters away from the main battlefield, Anduin Lothar stood upright on the back of his horse like a sharp sword. He was the most trusted commander, and the highest commander of the alliance. Anduin was not only surrounded by knights, but also an entire hand of silver waiting for his orders. Anduin's hand was on the hilt of his sword. His eyes were sunken from staying up all night, and his eyeballs kept moving. His gaze was as sharp as an eagle's as he patrolled the plains. The cheers of the orcs shook the earth. This made Anduin a little uneasy. Obviously, Great Chief Orgrim had boosted the morale of the entire tribe. On the other hand, Anduin felt like he was screwed. Tyrrhenus had gone crazy from wanting to take credit. He used the excuse that Rotterdam had sent the most troops to change the formation, and wanted the armies of the other 8 countries to form around the Rotterdam army. If the Rotterdam army was as elite as Mograines, then Anduin could forget about it. But why did this have to happen? Tyrrhenus had forced all the private soldiers of the nobles to come up to 150,000 men. Instead, he let Gilnis and Alterac, who were more powerful, transport food. He even threatened to withdraw his troops at every turn. Alright, now the front and center were all Rotterdam. On the left was the well-equipped Dalagan army, and the Highland cavalry from Torrential Fortress. On the right was the allied army of Bronzebeard, Wildhammer and Gnomes. At the back were Cuel Salis and the Dalagan mages, as well as the rangers. Chapter 553. Anduin knew that as long as the horde was fierce enough, they would be able to break through the front line, and the front line of the alliance. Then the alliance would be in trouble. Yes, the ones at the back of the central formation were the private soldiers from all over the Rotterdam kingdom. To put it nicely, they were private soldiers, but to put it bluntly, they were armed to the teeth farmers. Not to mention other strong armies. Even Duque's 30,000 private soldiers would be able to kill the 100,000 soldiers with a single charge. At this time, Anduin wished that he had the 100,000 elites of Stormwind in his hands. Unfortunately, Stormwind's war could not be sloppy. Although Duque made it clear that even his 30,000 private soldiers would be able to succeed, most of the Stormwind soldiers were still sent to Aylwyn, including the Griffin Legion. It was not that Duque Lang or Anduin wanted it, but that Tyrrhenus was too enthusiastic. We agreed to support you guys in the first place. Now we feel bad if we don't send troops over to help. We're letting our allies down. You can't possibly not bring your own troops, right? What he said made sense. Anduin would not know that Stormwind, which had less than 5,000 soldiers left in the original history, would definitely need the support of the Alliance to restore the country. In this life, there was no need at all. Because of Duke's appearance, not only did the elite soldiers that should have been lost survive, but because of the reclamation of the farmlands in Hillsbrad Hills, the number of Stormwind Kingdom's soldiers increased as they fought. If it were not for the fact that they did not want to be militaristic, it would not be a problem to bring 300,000 soldiers out. Anyway, maintaining 100,000 soldiers under the direct command of the kingdom and 30,000 private soldiers under Duque was a very ideal force. Anyway, Tyrrhena's kindness this time was as unnecessary as your mother wanting you to wear down in autumn because she thought you were cold. It was hard to refuse. Just like that, most of the troops of Stormwind were brought back to Aylwyn. Together with the People's Army in the Western Wilderness, it was definitely more than enough for the Western Front. However, Lothar did not have an army with enough soldiers. He only had a small army of 5,000 people. In a sense, Tyrrhenus had taken over Lothar's power. Looking into the distance, Anduin sighed deeply. Fortunately, we still have the trump card of the Crimson Dragon Legion. That was right. According to Duque, they could indeed mobilize the Red Dragon army. But there was a price to pay. It can't be helped. Those damn dragons are all money-grubbing fellows. It was true that they hated the Horde, but it was fine if they killed their main force. If they had to fly all the way here, it would definitely cost them some money. It won't be much, just 2 million gold coins each time. I guarantee that there will be at least one 10,000-year-old ancient giant dragon holding the fort, and at least 5 1,000-year-old young dragons working there. The Alliance didn't believe Duque's words at first. Why? The Red Dragon army had always taken on the responsibility of protecting the world. They had fought the demons for tens of thousands of years, and had never confiscated money once. In the era of Aegwin, the previous protector, she could be summoned at any time. In the end, some Dalajan mages who didn't believe him contacted the Red Dragon Queen, but they were immediately sent back by Alexstrasza. This is a battle of the mortal world. The Red Dragon army shouldn't have gotten involved. After all, we have some personal grudges with the Horde. Don't ask me for the details, asked Duque. I'll leave it to him. Even the Queen had said so. The Alliance leaders who couldn't take down the blockhouses outside the Iron Stove Fort could only pinch their noses and pay up. Duke would openly take the money, and then secretly split the spoils with the giant dragon. You take half, I take half, we split it. Duque even hid this from Lang and Anduin. But no matter what, with the trump card of the Red Dragon army, any commander would be full of confidence. That was the theory, but Anduin still felt that something was wrong. Because it was too abnormal. Why did the Horde dare to challenge the Alliance when they knew that the Alliance had the help of the Red Dragon army? This wasn't a one-on-one battle between generals. This was a battle of hundreds of thousands of people. Perhaps it could be attributed to the Beastman's violent character and fearless courage. But Anduin still felt uneasy. Now it was useless to say anything. The arrow had to be fired. The food for nearly 300,000 people made Anduin's hair turn white every day. After all, the location of the battle was not any of the Alliance's territories, but the barren scorching canyon. Even when the wetlands, Dan Moreau, and Loch Moden started the War of Liberation in the northern parts of the southern continent, Duque had already stored enough food to feed the 300,000 troops for 3 months. Anduin still felt a headache. It was too troublesome to transport the food. Either they went through Loch Moden and went around the barren land, making a big circle of 300 kilometers, or they were forced to send the food from the Iron Stove Fort, through the snow-covered mountain path of Dan Moreau, and through the huge mountain tunnel. The first path was costly. There were wild beasts everywhere. The soldiers who escorted the food had their swords stained with blood almost every day. The second path was slow, and because the mountain path was narrow, the transport capacity was too small. In a sense, the Alliance could not afford to drag it out. Is fighting the only way? Anduin's muttering made Uther frown. Woo woo woo. The unique sound of the horn echoed in the battle formation of the Alliance and the Horde. The scene in front of them seemed to repeat 2,800 years ago. On the earthy highlands, the flags of the various human clans shone under the sun. The knights did not have helmets. The only excellent equipment was the spears in their hands and the long swords at their waists. They did not even have armor. That was because they were facing a troll that was taller than them on horseback, even when they were standing. In the face of the power of the trolls, any human armor was a pale existence. But it was different from back then. Back then, there was a great man in front of them shouting, "Warriors from the various clans, the strongest knights of mankind, are you afraid?" The knights of that time, with their spears, their swords, and their lives, gave the only answer. What about now? Anduin's vision began to extend to the distance. What did he see? He saw the crooked central army of the Rotterdam. He saw the soldiers of the Rotterdam who were chatting. He saw the noble knights of the Rotterdam, who were dressed more beautifully than they would be in a masquerade. The corner of Anduin's eye twitched. He could not help but pray, Mograine. With such a group of nobles who only know how to play meritorious, your Scarlet Crusade must work harder. As if he heard Anduin's prayer, Mograine looked at a few positions in his team with slight disgust. Chapter 554. A while ago, they had sent a large number of knights to attack the Grimbader fortress, but they had failed. The consequences were beginning to show. The death of a large number of elite knights forced Mograine to promote more knight candidates to knights. To Mograine, the lack of experience was a small matter. Looking at the 5th and 6th legions of Rotterdam, many of the commanders were trash that tarnished the name of knights. Most of them were sent in by the nobles. This was the compromise that Turinas had to make with the nobles in the kingdom. The reason they were able to maintain their formation was purely because their subordinates were the most elite soldiers who had experienced the Battle of Silverpine Forest. Closer, closer, closer and closer. When the armies of the Alliance and the Horde approached the scorched land, the hot air began to turn cold and heavy. It was just an illusion. However, it was not a good illusion. The heat of the scorching canyon was unbearable. On the contrary, the beastmen led by the Blackrock clan felt that it was normal. Standing on a large rock at the front of the army, almost all the beastmen could see their chief, and the symbol of the scorching canyon, the hammer of destruction. They began to believe their chief's words. Even though rows of human warriors in bright armor were approaching them in an orderly fashion. Even though the spears of the humans were as dense as a forest, each spear tip shining with a piercing cold light. However, when their great tribal chief shouted those words that reverberated in the bloodline of the beastmen for thousands of years, those words that seemed to contain a mysterious power and were incomparably sacred for their entire lives. Every beastman received an answer for this war. What was that answer? Loktar Ogre. Yes. If they did not win, they would rather die. Loktar Ogre. 250,000 voices combined into one, echoing throughout the entire scorching canyon. Under their great chieftain's lead, the once still green sea began to surge with the most frenzied ferocity. That was the strongest fusion of the will of 250,000 people. It was also the roar of a desperate race for survival. Faced with the terrifying voice of the beastmen, Mograine and Anduin were deeply shocked. This battle was over. Mograine shouted at the top of his lungs. Ballistae and catapults fire first. The 1st and 2nd heavy cavalry regiments charged back. We must suppress the enemy's momentum. Throwing in their trump card at the start of the match was undoubtedly a very bad start. Mograine had no choice. This was because he saw Orgrim and his personal ogre guards, as well as more than 10 chieftains with terrifying combat abilities. That was definitely not an opponent that an ordinary shield formation could defend against. Anduin was nervous too. Tell Duque. I need his Red Dragon army now. Now. After sending the message, Anduin raised his hand. Storm Royal Knight's silver hand, follow me. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately galloped madly on his horse. We have to make it. Red Dragon. In fact, Duque had called for the Air Force earlier than them, but because the Red Dragons were not arranged to enter the barren land in advance, it would take more than 20 minutes for the Red Dragons to fly over, no matter how fast they were. The Rotterdam heavy cavalry filed out from both sides of the front line. After quickly forming an arrow formation, the horses began to speed up and trot on the battlefield. The knights held their heads high, and the tips of their spears were lowered in rows. Soon, a silver wave appeared at the front of the battlefield. It surged forward with the momentum of thousands of soldiers and horses, ready to collide with the terrifying green wave. Black ballistae rose diagonally from the human formation and poured towards the front of the orcs with a density that could cover the sky. Mograine could imagine that in a dozen seconds, there would be countless holes in the green sea, and this wave would stagnate. Something no one thought would happen. Suddenly, the sound of ballistae could be heard from the orcs' formation. A bunch of strange ballistae were shot out. At this moment Duque, who was advancing with the dwarves on the right, was stunned. What the hell? Isn't that a helicopter's propeller? The thing that was shot out really looked like a propeller. When the ballistae shot out by the orcs flew into the air, due to inertia, the helical fins attached to the ballistae's arrowheads were lifted up and started to spin at high speed due to the rapid flow of air. In the next moment, like a shaving machine, most of the ballistae shot at the orc infantry were shaved into countless pieces. The humans' ballistae had failed. This must be the work of our distant dark iron dwarves, Magni muttered. His words were right. The orcs only knew how to use thick and hard weapons. Such a low-tech but effective war machine was definitely not an invention of the orcs. This also meant that the charging heavy cavalry had lost their cover. Axes. Orgrim, who was leading the charge, did not forget to give the order. The charging orcs began to remove the short axes tied to their waists. Those were throwing axes specially prepared for them by the dark iron dwarfs. Even though each axe was as big as the axes humans used to chop trees, It could only be used for throwing against the tall and strong orcs. The axes were made of black iron, and they were rather crude. But with the orcs' innate strength, they could easily throw them more than 50 meters away. The flying axes that were as dense as raindrops let out ear-piercing screeches. They spun in the air, drawing terrifying arcs in the air as they attacked the charging heavy cavalry. The heavy armor of the Rotterdam soldiers that could easily block the rain of arrows became meaningless. A few hundred kilograms of force was concentrated on the narrow blades of the axes, be it the iron-coated kite shields or the armor that was more than 5 millimeters thick. They could not withstand the terrifying power of the axes. Ah! No. Mother, I don't want to die. Anyone who was hit would be sent flying 4 to 5 meters away before crashing into the ground, or dismembered instantly. Broken horse heads, horse legs, human limbs and broken lances flew less than 30 meters away from the orc vanguard. Out of 10 heavy cavalry, only 1 or 2 would be able to reach the orcs at most. But they were not much better off than their comrades. The ogres' 3-meter-long war hammers were no weaker than the lances of the heavy cavalry with their long arms. A faster and fiercer counterattack would usually arrive first. Before the charge of the lances taught by the knights could reach them, they were sent flying with their horses in a violent gust of wind. It was easy to imagine how terrifying Orgrim's personal guards were to be able to throw a man and a horse that weighed nearly 500 kilograms with a hammer. Chapter 555. The green tide surged across the dark ground at high speed. Even the faces of the Rotterdam soldiers, standing at the front, did not seem to have the emotions of the living. They were cold, indifferent, and calm. In fact, the mercury-like luster flowing on their hands betrayed them. It was cold sweat. Hold on. Hold on. You can definitely hold on. The empty slogans of the frontline commanders did not give them any more courage. The only thing they knew was that before the forest of spears collapsed, they would be safe. Throw the axes, Orgrim ordered again. The axes that whistled through the air caused a large number of killings in the orderly human spears and shields. Almost instantly, the orderly shield formation was like a sandcastle eroded by seawater, and was immediately riddled with holes. There was no time to fill the gaps. The thousands of orcs charged forward in a crooked manner, and like a giant axe, they slashed into the army of the Rotterdam kingdom. When the valiant orc warriors collided with the panicked human warriors, the orc warriors were stunned. The entire front line immediately erupted with the loudest sound since the start of the battle. Heart-wrenching screams, desperate wails, the sound of heavy weapons colliding with metal shields, and the sound of spears stabbing into flesh were all heard. What made Mograine furious was that the shield formation that he'd been lucky with fell like dominoes. The orcs' vanguard did not stop at all. It was as if they had passed by each other and easily destroyed the entire front line. It was not that no human soldiers survived the first wave of impact, but the orcs did not even give them a second blow. They simply knocked them to the ground, and the whole army stepped on them, trampling them to death. The scene that seemed like a bowling ball quickly returned to normal. It was still the same green tide. All the silver in the front line lost its color in just a few minutes, and was devoured by the surging green. Mograine knew that he'd made a mistake. He should have stopped earlier and advanced slowly. He was not the only one. The entire alliance relaxed because of the atmosphere of victory. They thought that the tribes were just lambs waiting to be slaughtered. However, they could still be saved. Losing 20,000 vanguard soldiers was not the end of the world. Call for a magic strike. At the same time, the FFF team will take the lead. We must first defeat the orcs' vanguard team. Mograine's order echoed in the magic communication network. No, Mograine. It was the ogre army that had been strengthened by the storm altar. The effect of the spell isn't good. In the communication network, Duque could not help but interrupt. Suddenly Tyrrheus said, "Duque, shut up." During the meeting, we agreed that Mograine would be in charge of the central and vanguard armies. Obviously, Tyrrheus was anxious as well. Idiot. He doesn't trust the mages in the magical domain, but trusts a commander who's a knight. Magni Bronzebeard spat harshly when he heard the message. Duque sighed. No, it's Tyrrhena's who wants to be Thoradin the Great. After Duque revealed the truth, Magni was silent for a few seconds before he suddenly said, Duque, why don't we form an alliance in the southern continent? Duque smiled. It doesn't have to be so complicated. However, I don't mind building a high-speed underground railway between Stormwind and Ironforge. In that case, none of us will be afraid of being besieged again. Good idea. He was a little annoyed by Duque's strange rejection, but the idea of building an underground railway made his eyes light up. Yes, if the Lordaeron alliance is really that bad, we dwarves can just form an alliance with Stormwind. After experiencing the siege of the orcs, Magni was enlightened. Dwarves and gnomes alone were not enough. Humans were a very necessary addition, whether it was as an ally or as a trading partner. There were so many human kingdoms. Of course, they would choose the one that was most pleasing to the eye. For example, Stormwind, where Duque and Anduin were. The orcs were also in a triangular formation. Now that the front line of the alliance had collapsed, the two flanks had not joined up yet. At this time, countless rays of magical light rose from the rear of the alliance. This heavy rain of magical elements started from the center of the battlefield near the left side and swept towards the right side. In Mograin's imagination, even if the orc vanguard did not collapse immediately, there would be a huge gap in the battlefield. Even if the middle army could not immediately seize this opportunity to turn the tide, they could try to get the FFF flamethrower team into position. As long as they stood firm and pushed forward, it would not be too difficult to win this battle in one fell swoop. Unexpectedly, the vanguard formed by Orgrim was too terrifying. The magic that poured down did not cause too many casualties, especially the ogres. The weaker magic that landed on them would only cause the wind shields, that seemed to be born with, to sway a little. They would sway a little, and then continue to charge with their huge weapons or shields. Although the orcs' attack was chaotic, it was effective because they had completely suppressed the alliance in terms of momentum. Moreover, they were not afraid of death. Spit fire! Spit fire! Burn these green-skinned creatures to death! The lack of experience of the frontline commander was magnified at this moment. Mograine did not see that Orgrim's personal guards were so fierce, but he had already noticed that the vanguard was the Blackrock tribe's orcs. Hence, he ordered them to throw their spears. However, that bunch of ignorant and incompetent noble young masters gave the order to spit fire. Long tongues of fire flew tens of meters in the air, forming dazzling fire snakes. However, it was useless. The Blackrock tribe's orcs were born with high fire resistance. In the eyes of the Rotterdam people, these Blackrock orcs were the most terrifying flame demons. This was because these wild and violent orcs actually rushed over with their weapons blazing. They thought that they would struggle for a few meters before falling and dying like ordinary people. 10 meters passed. 20 meters passed. 30 meters. Even when they screamed and pounced in front of the middle army, they were still not burned to death. Ah, monsters! We can't win. We can't win against these fire orcs. A soldier abandoned his duty. More soldiers abandoned the spears in their hands. However, they were shocked to find that their commander had fled the battle line before them. The middle army of the alliance also began to collapse. Lexa waved his axes and fought together with his battle pets. Looking at the crumbling front of the alliance, he felt as if his beating heart was pumping out the blood of victory. This feeling was so overwhelming. He turned to look at Zuluhid, who was not far away, and easily saw the same emotion in his eyes. The orcs might really win. Chapter 556. As a mixed blood between an ogre and an orc, Rexer had never been liked by his own kind. Ever since he joined this expedition across worlds, everything had changed. At the very least, he was respected by Great Chief Orgrim. In human terms, it would be a warrior dying for his bosom friend. For Orgrim, he would not hesitate to block Duque's ultimate attack at grim battle. So what if he was heavily injured? So what if he was covered in wounds? If he was fighting for the future of the tribe, then it was all worth it. Now that he finally saw the light of victory, Rexer was excited. When he killed the row of humans in front of him, with an extremely fast whirlwind axe, he suddenly realized that they had already killed through the front of the central formation. Within a radius of 100 meters, there was not a single human standing. Was victory really coming? Suddenly, every orc heard a distant roar that seemed to come from ancient times. It was the sound of dragons. They were once the mounts of the orcs, but they broke free and became the nightmare of the entire tribe. The new members of the tribe showed confused expressions, and the faces of the veterans who had retreated from the front lines darkened. They still remembered how these ancient ferocious beasts, who were once on their side, had easily turned the army of 100,000 in front of Grim Battle Fortress into ashes. How they had destroyed the fortresses that the humans had sacrificed so much in Dan Malyo's territory, but could not advance even an inch. They were like toys. The orcs' roar suddenly died down. In contrast, the humans immediately erupted in the most enthusiastic cheers since the start of the war. Ha ha ha. The dragons are here, ugly green-skinned. You can all wait for death. Repent in the flames of hell, green monsters. The Red Dragon Army is of the Alliance. As long as the Red Dragons are here, you will never occupy our land. It seemed that every terrestrial race wanted to break free from the shackles of gravity, fly into the sky, and soar into the sky. This was an innate instinct and desire. Duque still remembered that in the World War II movies he watched before he transmigrated, almost every soldier would give the most enthusiastic cheers to the planes that swooped down from the sky. The excitement of watching one's patron saint descend from the sky would never get tired of it, no matter how many times it happened. Not to mention, it was a giant dragon that humans had revered for countless years since the birth of Azeroth. Just when every single orc was stunned, panicked, and hopeless or grim, the man who charged in front of all the orcs, the man who proved the honor of the orcs with his blood and bravery, once again stood on the high ground and raised the destroyer hammer that seemed to be flowing with lava. The chief's rough roar echoed in all directions. Ignorant humans, do you think that dragons are the only rulers of this world? Ha ha ha. What a joke. Despicable lizard, you're going to pay the price for your arrogance. Orgrim shouted twice. The first time was in the orc language, and the second time was in the human language. Following Orgrim's words, the human commanders felt gloomy for the first time. Did Orgrim still have something up his sleeves? It wasn't just Lothar, Mograine, Turinas, and the others. Even Duque, who was a transmigrator, was stunned. He frantically searched through his memories of this battle. Damn, according to history, the orcs would definitely fall in the Battle of Black Rock Mountain. Other than Orgrim killing Lothar, the orcs didn't even have a chance to retaliate. What the hell happened? Is it because of the 21% mismatch? It was as if he was replying to Duque, who was a transmigrator who randomly changed the plot. Orgrim slammed his hammer onto the ground of the scorching canyon. Bam! In the next second, the hundreds of thousands of people fighting in the scorching canyon felt the ground shake. It wasn't caused by the heavy cavalry charging, nor was it caused by Orgrim's hammer. It was a vibration that came from the inside out, and the entire scorching canyon shook. Other than the dwarves who had a lower center of gravity, almost all the soldiers, be it humans or orcs, fell to the ground. Lothar, who had just started to rush forward from the rear, was hit at the same time by the Storm Kingdom's knights and the Silver Hand Knights. They were galloping at high speed. Except for the members of the Silver Hand Knights, who had outstanding horsemanship, many of the Storm Knights fell to the ground together with their horses. Many horses broke their legs, and many knights broke their arms, legs, and even their necks before they even joined the battle. Everywhere was a scene of chaos and chaos. Taking advantage of the collapse of the human army, Orgrim took the opportunity to kill his way into the human army that was in disarray. But at this time, other than the soldiers who were fighting, almost no one cared about the battle in the scorching canyon. Compared to the existences of the mortal world, the existences that transcended the mortal world were more terrifying. The scorching canyon was a lava canyon that stretched from the southwest to the northeast on the map. The battlefield was a small plain near Blackrock Tower in the southeast. Between this nameless plain and Charcoal Valley in the west, there was a huge rift that looked like it had been cut by a knife from above. The bottom of the rift was filled with churning lava. Now, a terrifying roar came from the lava river at the bottom of the rift. Everyone couldn't help but look at the rift. As the ground shook violently, chunks the size of carriages fell from the edge of the rift valley, producing thunderous sounds of heavy objects falling to the ground. The lava river at the bottom of the rift began to gush upward. Roar! As if it was an illusion, the dwarves on the right felt as if they could hear the faint roar of some ancient behemoth coming from the magma. Did you hear that? There seems to be the sound of a monster in the rift. You heard it too. The dwarves were discussing. What is that? Sasha tugged at the sleeve of Duque's wizard robe, her face showing a complicated expression of excitement and nervousness. Duque, can you guess what it is? Aurelia was the first to notice the constipated expression on Duque's face. Damn, I'd rather not guess it myself. Duque felt bitter. Roar. Once again. This time, no one doubted it. And it was getting closer. The roar was getting closer and closer. Everyone knew that the source of the roar was quickly approaching the surface from under the lava. At this moment, almost everyone stopped fighting, be it the human soldiers who were raising their shields, or the orc warriors who were about to swing their axes. They all turned around in shock. They looked up and saw a terrifying stream of lava shooting up from the bottom of the rift towards the Red Dragon team. Chapter 557. Dodge! The leading ancient red dragon warned his companions in draconic language the moment the lava spewed out. The 7 red dragons flapped their wings and did a beautiful somersault in the air. They weren't hit, but they were in a sorry state. Red dragons love to play with fire, and so did their opponents. The red dragons shouldn't have been at a disadvantage. However, the ancient red dragon's face, which was full of expressions, was filled with solemnity. He got the team to spread out as much as possible and hovered in the air, quietly observing the mysterious creature that was about to erupt from the lava. On the other side of the battlefield, it was already a little difficult to continue fighting, due to the appearance of that mysterious monster. The originally incomparably dark land also suddenly flashed between heaven and earth, turning into a vast expanse of white. In that second, everyone seemed to see the sun. It wasn't a sun that fell from the sky, but a sun that rose from the ground. The huge crack in the scorching canyon seemed to have been specially opened for it, and a ball of dazzling yellow radiance gushed out from below. Of course, there was also the unbearable heat at the same time. F***CK, the Red Dragon army has traded with the opponent. Duque couldn't help but mutter to himself when he saw this. He suddenly wanted to say something in the magical communication circuit, but he was shocked to find that the entire circuit had collapsed due to the intense elemental disturbance. Duque realized something. He gestured for Magni to get down at the first instant, and then he pounced on the 3 Windrunner sisters beside him. OL4 was in the Elven Forest, so after taking care of Aurelia and Winrisa, he pounced on Sylvanas as well. Queen Sylvie was a little annoyed when the back of her head touched the scorching ground, but when she saw that even Magni was yelling "get down" in the Dwarven language, she also realized that something was wrong. Time seemed to have stopped. The object in the middle of the canyon crack released a terrifying heat wave. No, it wasn't a heat wave anymore. It was a pure explosion. The huge shockwave from the explosion easily expelled the air around the crack. The shockwave was faster than sound, but it didn't make a sound when it exploded. However, be it the commanders who opened their mouths to shout at their subordinates, or the soldiers who were fighting on the front lines, they were all horrified to find that the sound had disappeared. After a full 3 to 4 seconds, a terrifying and shrill explosion suddenly burst forth, as if the entire world had exploded. The huge shockwave started from the right wing closest to the crack, and swept across the entire battlefield. Everything that was over a meter tall suffered. First, the orcs, who thought they had the upper hand, were immediately blown away by the shockwave mixed with high-temperature lava. They were thrown high into the air, and before they could even struggle in the air, they were turned into piles of charcoal. The fiercest shockwave basically happened on the right wing of the Alliance. When it reached the center, a large amount of fire elements had already risen diagonally, so the shockwave was reduced to a pure shockwave. Even so, be it the giant ogres that were 4 meters tall, or the knights on the heavy warhorses, as long as they still had the courage to stand, they would be lifted by the strong wind and thrown to the left. The lighter ones would be several meters away, and the worse ones would glide for a dozen meters in midair before they fell on the scorching black soil of the scorching canyon again. The ground was filled with smoke and dust. At the center of the right wing, the female elf's laughter rang out. Sasha laughed. "Duque, why didn't you use ice barrier this time?" At this moment, Duque suddenly realized that he was a little distracted when he pounced. While the posture was a little awkward, it was full of benefits. He looked up from between Aurelia's Mount Hygel without the slightest bit of embarrassment. Only then did he realize that the right half of his body was on Aurelia, and the left half of his body was on top of Sasha. His left hand was behind Sasha's waist. Then, when he used his right hand to pull Sylvanas down, his right hand was actually grabbing onto her right breastplate. It was separated by the cold breastplate, but that action was a little unsightly. Facing Queen Sylvanas' angry gaze, Duque decisively retracted his right hand, looking like he was a gentleman. Pressing the ground with his right hand, he pulled Sasha up with his left hand and then Aurelia. Duque said softly, "It's not the final moment yet." Then he looked at the enormous creature rising from the crack in the scorching canyon. Not just him. Everyone who had come back to their senses looked at the center of the canyon in a daze. Duque couldn't care about anything else anymore. He directly used a sound amplification spell and shouted, "Everyone, retreat to the center if you don't want to die." Duque was very cunning. He used the system's translation function to shout in the Dwarven language. Then, without saying anything more, he directly led his own people to the center of the canyon. A magnificent scene appeared. Under Duque's lead, 40,000 dwarves began to run in gear. Before the bewildered orcs on the left wing could react, they had already run hundreds of meters. Behind them, the surging lava seemed to be alive. It kept rolling upwards, but gradually, it turned into an inverted triangle with only the upper body of a flame giant. On the battlefield at the center, the survivors looked up in horror at the terrifying fire elemental creature that was growing larger and larger. Just the shoulder width alone was almost 50 meters. In the mage's way of addressing simple elements, they would call them fire elementals or ice elementals. Only elemental creatures would be called fire elementals. Now that such a huge fire elemental had suddenly appeared, it was already beyond people's understanding. This was definitely not an elite fire elemental. This was at least a boss-level fire elemental. Where did this terrifying monster come from? At this moment Sasha, who was running and looking back, finally asked curiously, "What exactly is that?" Duque gritted his teeth and said, "Baron Geddon, a subordinate of Ragnaros, the Lord of Flames." Duque's mind was full of all kinds of unscientific transmigration movies. That was Baron Geddon. Back in the game, 40 players happily wiped out a legendary boss in front of him for an entire night. Not to mention the half of the Wind Chaser's head on its body, or the warrior player's unparalleled hatred for it. Just its appearance alone was enough to make Duque feel like he was in a trance. Normally, this was at least the storyline of the Dark Portal in 25 years. Only then did the reputation of Hydraxia appear, and Duke Hydraxis called on the players to defeat Ragnaros. Well, now the boss from 25 years later had popped out and affected the city. How could this be tolerated? Chapter 558. Actually, he couldn't be blamed for running out, because this was their territory to begin with. In order to defend the ancient god that he believed in, Ragnaros had once led an army together with the other 3 elemental lords, Therazane the Stone Mother, Alakir the Wind Wielder, and Neptulin the Tide Hunter against the Titans. However, they were defeated and imprisoned in the elemental plane. When the elemental lords had gradually faded from the sight of intelligent beings in the world of Azeroth for many years, the dwarves' War of the Three Hammers broke out more than 200 years ago. the leader of the Black Iron clan, Emperor Tharisan, started the war. But in the face of the combined forces of the Iron Furnace Fort and the Wildhammer tribe, the Black Iron dwarves were defeated. Emperor Tharisan, who was about to be defeated, began to summon powerful elemental creatures in order to win the war. Unfortunately, what he summoned was not an ordinary elemental creature, but one of the most powerful existences in the elemental plane, Flame Lord Ragnaros. After blowing up half of the Redridge Mountain and creating the Burning Steppes and Scorching Canyon, Ragnaros left the molten core under the Blackrock Abyss to Majordomo to take care of. He then fell into a deep slumber. As a matter of fact, Majordomo Executus, who looked like a male Naga, but had huge curved spikes on his back, had been conscious the entire time. In the second battle between the Horde and the Alliance didn't have the support of the Red Dragon Legion. Ragnaros, who was too lazy to care about the mortals, ignored the tragic war in the mortal world. Now, because Duque had saved Alexstrasza in advance, and used the Red Dragon army to destroy the Horde's resistance, Orgrim had taken advantage of this. When the Dark Iron dwarves told Orgrim that they were actually Ragnaros' slaves, Orgrim was tempted. He had the Dark Iron dwarves act as a go-between for him. At the start, King of Flames didn't even care about Orgrim. However, for the sake of victory, Orgrim cleverly raised a question. What if the Red Dragon army invaded the Scorching Canyon? The servants of the King of Flames will destroy those giant lizards that dare to invade, Executus replied. In the end, the entire alliance was conned. Yep, Orgrim had accidentally dragged his tribe into this mess as well. He had no idea which servant would come. Even though Duque was a transmigrator, even though he knew that Majordomo Executus would send a boss to help, Duque couldn't guess who it was. This was because in the Molten Core, there were 8 bosses that could be sent out. Now, seeing the Horde's left flank being burnt to a crisp, Orgrim's heart was also bleeding, but he couldn't care less. To this day, when the humans were in perfect formation, 10,000 orcs could be crushed by a 5,000 human phalanx. Now that the most important battle formation of the human race had completely collapsed, wasn't it the best time for the tribe to expand their advantage? Let's cheer for the new ally of the Horde, the servant of the Flame King. The giant lizards flying in the sky were no longer a problem. Go, brave orcs, Loktar Ogre. He would rather die than win. Loktar Ogre. The orcs' earth-shattering cheers once again resounded throughout the battlefield. Every orc's morale was at an all-time high. They stared in front of them, at the back of the great chief who was raising his flaming warhammer high. The head of the famous Hammer of Destruction was burning with dazzling flames, and it looked like it was mirroring the fire elemental monster in the distance. In the light of the fire, Orgrim's broad back looked like he was wearing a flaming cape, and on his head was a flaming crown. That blazing battle intent infected every beast man. Ancestors above, our great chief can even control such a terrifying fire elemental. What enemy can we not defeat? For the Horde charge. The Horde's desire for battle grew stronger, and almost every commander of the Alliance lost their composure. Your Majesty, please leave first. The chief court mage of Tyreenas opened a portal to Lordaeron with a cold expression. No, if I run away at this time, what will others think of me? Also, I refuse to use the portal. Tyreenas argued. Your Majesty, I have to remind you, your body is not suited for a retreat. I can't guarantee your safety during the retreat. It was nice to say that they were retreating, but in fact, the mage felt that the Alliance would be completely defeated. But, I am the general of the Alliance. Tyreenas said unwillingly. The commanders of this battle are General Mograine and General Abendis. One of his ministers reminded. Another of his ministers reminded him, implying that Tyreenas was just a mascot in the chain of command. But as a king, running away at the last minute would be a bad thing. Tyreenas hesitated. At this time, a mage not far from Tyreenas suddenly clutched his head and screamed in pain. Ah, the first, the second, the fifth. Even though there were not many of them, it was enough to alert the higher-ups of the Alliance, because it was the same for the Dalajan. The court mage of Lordaeron's expression changed. Oh no, it's mana burn. Mana burn? Terenas, who knew almost nothing about magic, asked in surprise. It uses a mysterious method to cause chaos in the mana circuit of the unknown's bodies, and use the unknown's own mana to harm the unknowns. Not only the mages but also the priests. After explaining, the mage immediately turned around. Priest? Where are the priests? Can this magic be dispelled? Seems like it can. The priest had already started casting. The result shocked Terenas and the mage. This mana burn spell was quite advanced. The priest's dispel was effective, but it had to be a high-level priest's dispel. However, because almost all the bishops in the area had been sacrificed in the previous attack, most of the bishops had died. The chain of events caused the result to be very bad. Out of the 5 mages, only 1 was saved. The other 4 were burned to death by their own magical power that had erupted from within them. The next moment, something even worse happened. Suddenly, a soldier was bathed in fire, and the people around him backed away in fear. But this guy did not feel anything, because he did not feel anything. In just a few seconds, he suddenly turned into a huge bomb. At the same time that it blew itself up, it also caused a terrifying second explosion damage to everyone within 100 meters. Duque could tell at a glance that this was Baron Geddon's other ultimate skill, Living Bomb. Chapter 559. Baron Geddon's attack. No, it shouldn't even be called an attack. Whether it was mana burn or living bomb, this was not a deliberate attack by this fire elemental boss. It was purely a random attack caused by the high concentration of fire elemental energy on its body, which caused the surrounding elements to surge. To put it bluntly, these guys were hit even though they were just lying down. Of course, only those with magic circuits would be hit by mana burn. Living Bomb, on the other hand, did not differentiate between friend and foe. Not only the Alliance but also the Horde. Unfortunately, the humans were more rational, and the more simple-minded orcs thought that this was all a human's magic. The evil humans had really become the scapegoats this time. So when the human army fell into further chaos and collapse, the orc warriors continued to shout Loktar Ogre and launched a desperate charge. As Duque rode on horseback, he tried to communicate with Alexstrasza using magic. After he explained the situation in a few words, the Red Dragon Queen was silent for a few seconds before replying. Duque, it's not that I don't want to help you, but ever since the Red Dragon Army was founded, we have been following the same principle for thousands of years. Whether it's me or my dragon people, we are all born to protect this world. This is the highest meaning of our existence. Do you understand? Duque was also silent for a few seconds before sighing. I understand. In a sense, the Red Dragon Army was more like the strictest law enforcement. It was not wrong to think of them as the police. They not only strictly demanded of all the people they were monitoring, but also strictly demanded of themselves. The biggest reason why Alexstrasza agreed to attack the Horde with Duque was that the Horde had once enslaved her. Before Duque traveled to this world, this would have been called assaulting a police officer. Although Ragnaros once fought against us under the command of the evil ancient god, a few of us dragons have discussed that elemental creatures are also a part of this world. If they show signs of destroying the world, we will not attack them. So sorry. Then can you communicate with them and ask you and Ragnaros' men not to attack? Yes. Give me some time. I don't think they want to fight me. After ending the magic transmission, Duque suddenly understood something. Although people often say that changing the past can change the future, in fact, a little change will not bring about change in the future. History should also have its own ability to repair itself. Even if someone returned to the past and successfully saved 1 or 2 people, history would not easily change. Because so what if he saved some people? If it was just a beggar with no sense of existence, then as long as the decisive outcome of history did not change, history would continue to evolve. The situation Duque was in now was similar. The Red Dragon Army was added to the Alliance in this world. Then, The power of fate in this world cleverly allowed a faction that had existed for a long time to suddenly appear and slap Duque, a transmigrator, in the face. Fine, a slap it is. To Duque, this kind of slap didn't hurt him at all. Maybe he could just endure it. But what is the purpose of living in this world? Isn't it to live a wonderful life, and not to waste this life? As he urged his horse to move with the dwarven army, Duque looked at Aurelia on his left, who was riding a chocobo, and then at Sasha on his right, who was looking back at him tenderly, and then at Cervantes, who was further away from Sasha. Duque's heart suddenly ached. Why? Because Duque suddenly remembered that if he could not truly change his fate, in a few years, Aurelia would join the Outland expedition and die in the Outland. And in the Third War at the Dark Portal, Cervantes would also die at the hands of Arthas, who led the Scourge army. Regardless of the relationship between Cervantes and himself, just the fact that her becoming the Forgotten Queen would make Aurelia and Sasha sad. Duque felt that he had the obligation to stop this from happening. This was definitely not an easy thing to do, because Cervantes' death, and then leading the Forgotten, was definitely one of the most important events in the history of Azeroth. If the power of historical correction he hypothesized really existed, then he must have a way to break it. The simplest proof was that after the end of the First War, at the Dark Portal marked by the fall of Stormwind City, the similarity of the world of Azeroth in the system notification dropped from 80% to 79%. If that was the case, then there was no mistake. There must be a decisive moment. And if this moment was changed, then it would completely change the fate of the future. Duque thought about it, and decided to name it Singularity. These singularities of fate were generally consistent with the history of Azeroth that he was familiar with, but if there was anything different between them and the history of Azeroth, it was that these singularities were the most important turning points in the history of Azeroth. If Arthas had not pulled out Frostmourne, if Kael, that's who was at the end of his rope, had not been forced to rebel by that stupid human Grand Marshal, these were the ultimate choice points that determined the history of Azeroth in the future. If these things failed or did not happen, it might be equivalent to the collapse of the entire history of Azeroth. These singularities were exactly like that. Duque suddenly said, "Aurelia, Sasha, I will make you happy." Duque's brainless words made Aurelia, who always looked at the big picture, blush. She rolled her eyes at him fiercely. "Bastard, what nonsense are you talking about in the middle of a war?" Sasha lowered her head sweetly and snorted. "Yes." Cervantes, who was beside her, facepalmed. "You little rascal, look at the situation. If you do this again, even if you are my brother-in-law, I will still teach you a lesson." Hina, Aurelia was anxious. "Second sister," Sasha said coquettishly. Duque smiled and thought to himself, "All right, goddess of fate, you win this time. But as for what I have set my mind on, I will not compromise even if I declare war on you." While Duque was thinking of a way to save the situation of the Alliance continued to slide towards the abyss of destruction. The right wing of the Alliance was in the best situation because of the orcs. Anduin looked through the binoculars. At least he saw a relatively complete organization, and the flag of the Iron Furnace Fort was not messed up. The left wing was not much better. In a sense, the Dalajan infantry was not very reliable. They signed an employment contract with the Dalajan, and were completely mercenaries. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.